We're live with the final chapter of our Worm installment. Not really, because there's Tenorol.
Do we want to do Tenorol with spec or no?
Uh, do they deserve it, Bradley? Yeah, they
Uh,
deserve it.
I'm trying to think.
Well,
We'll
if
see how long spec goes.
because spec might actually literally take an hour, but if I look at the clock and we're like 40 in, we'll also throw in Tenorol.
Yeah.
How about that?
How about
Um, Man, spec though. I can't understate how much I love this arc. This is fantastic.
yeah? Like I already really liked this arc, um, but like I like it even more now. Like as you were talking about the particular things you liked about it, I was like, this is really good.
That is really good.
This is really good.
Um, I think it's interesting, right? Because Worm has built up all of these characters throughout its story. And while Taylor was the main character, and I've had my frustrations in being in her head, we hopped around to a lot of other focuses, This arc is so focused on Taylor. It it almost has nothing to do with anyone else, in my opinion. Taylor is the star of the show for all 7 chapters. And it's almost like Wildbow's like, I put you through the ringer. I made you be in this crazy chick's head for this long just so you could fully appreciate these following 7 chapters.
Yeah, this is like finally cashing in
Everything.
on Taylor being the like unreliable narrator who is actually a psychopath. We're
Yeah.
finally cashing in on that, and we get this amazing last arc.
There are so many good things to talk about in this. Let's just jump right into it. Um, 30. Mo, this is. I'm feeling nervous now. It's like when we were doing 26 or Breaking Bad or like Steel Ball Run, where it's like, okay, if I don't bring up all the good juicy bits, I won't sleep well tonight
Yeah.
because it is that good and it deserves all the praise that I hope it gets. I don't know. This is a well liked finale, right?
Oh yeah.
Fantastic. Because I mean, we'll talk about it when we get there, but let's say that I'm a fan. So I'm gonna skip a lot of 30.1 and just say that it's all build up. 30.1 is this insane build up to whatever mistake Panacea did to Taylor. By the way, I am the vice president of Fuck Taylor Club, but I am the executive leader of the Fuck Panacea Club. Can't stand her, but and she goofed up here because she just created the most terrifying monster humanity's maybe ever seen.
Yeah, and it's funny because in the moments leading up to this, this is a girl who previously would have never worked on brains, and this is something Bonesaw would have loved to do. But then leading up to this, Panacea's like, yeah, I'll do it, and Bonesaw's like, hold on, like,
And it makes sense too because Bonesaw has always had maybe top 5 understandings of powers in the series, from all
yeah,
her experimentation.
it's like
So
a big part of like we've kind of learned up to this point that when a trigger event takes place, and this is something that Bonesaw even has like talked about. I think she talked about it in her interlude, and maybe back when she had a paralyzed Taylor, where
yeah,
in the moments of a trigger event, like people get their power, and then in the next few seconds, it like puts in all these safeguards to make sure that you won't just kill yourself and everyone around you. These are safeguards, like for example, Sundancer isn't going to get obliterated by her own son.
yeah.
So what Taylor is asking of Panacea here is like, hey, remove all the restrictions for my power if you can. So Bonesaw's like, okay, like, hold on a second.
I don't because I love this arc so much. I think this is like one of 2 negatives, so I'll bring it up anyways.
Okay.
The fact Panacea like her power makes me very uncomfortable as like a story device. To where if you have a power that can fundamentally break anyone, it's just such it makes me feel slimy when reading the story because it's like, oh man, how much future story events and past future events could have been solved if Panacea just fucks someone up. And I mean, clearly it's drastic that what happens to someone that she does unleash the limiters from. But the fact that there's a character that can do that anyways in this very specific system where the entities try to make sure no one can break the system because it's important that that they do conflict for all 300 years so that the entities can get as much information as they can. Just the fact that someone with this ability exists is very unsettling. But it's whatever, because just the tension of this first chapter. I don't remember at what point I understood what Taylor could really do. Granted, because of We've Got Worm and just the way the story is building up, I was like, man, Taylor's going to get that third trigger event that's going to give her the ability to control people. That happened. It wasn't a trigger event, but the specifics of it and how everyone is just trying to back away from her, and this 16-foot radius that is now integral to the remaining of this arc. It's so tense because as soon as anyone enters in it... So the specifics are, if anyone enters Taylor's radius at this point, they become controlled by her, but she can feel what they're feeling. They still have autonomous feelings, like they're still lucid in there, but they can't feel what she's feeling, right?
Right.
Ugh, so, I mean, that reminds us of someone. We'll talk about him in a little bit because I think it's even more relevant later. But 32.2 rolls around and Taylor's kind of understanding her power. And 32.2 has a lot of moments of Taylor capturing someone. What is the terminology we're going to use here? Enslaving, potentially.
I feel like capture is pretty accurate.
Well, we'll go with capture. As Taylor captures people, she starts instinctively understanding the ins and outs of her powers. Or their powers, rather, as controlled by her.
And one of my favorite moments in either 30.1 or 30.2, I can't quite remember, is when Rachel sees this new Taylor for the first time. Because as soon as she knows what this ability of Taylor's is, she immediately and deliberately steps into Taylor's radius. And
it's so interesting.
I really loved this because a large portion of the story was about trying to build this trust between Rachel and Taylor, where for a very long time, Rachel just assumed everybody, also Taylor, but kind of everybody just, was kind of not worthy of trusting. Like, she has her own way of doing things. Like, she knows how to handle herself, and if someone has a plan, it's kind of to backstab her. And some of Rachel's darkest moments are where she thought Taylor betrayed her trust, like when she found out Taylor had intended to betray the Undersiders.
Yeah, or the fake Taylor or fake Skitter from Arc 16.
Yeah, and so for as much as we've played with Rachel's amount of trust for Taylor, we get to this point where she's like, I trust her. She's smarter than me. She's able to make plans. She's like, just let her do what she needs to do with me.
There's a second layer to that. And it's Rachel, her biggest fear when it comes to human interactions and her biggest disgust is when people are manipulating her. She brings it up multiple times. It's kind of sad that her trust in Taylor built to a way to where now she's letting people that she trusts actively manipulate her. And I mean that in the strictest sense of the word, right? Where...
Quite literally manipulation.
Quite literally. It's tragic. Her trust in Taylor has become so blind and loyal to where she's like, go ahead, manipulate me. Which is, oof, man, that is mixed. I
didn't even think about that, but... You're right. There is kind of another element there.
It's a beautiful show of trust and a very alarming show of how well Taylor may or may not have manipulated this girl, at the end of the day, to warp her emotions like a trusting dog. I don't know, man. Everything with Rachel's so good. Um, Dairy Queen shows up. That's how my phone translated Fairy Queen.
Dairy Queen.
So she's Dairy Queen now. She's talking about how entities sometimes get too influenced by their masks, their hosts. So Scion is suffering more than they can imagine. We talked about this in 26, where Scion was more human than he originally thought, such as with the way he mentions the sun, the way he feels crushed, his whole rampage these last few chapters, right? And I think this is confirmation that, like, when an entity takes a form, they start getting influenced by that form they take more than they're willing to understand. And I mean, that's crucial to how they defeat Scion in the end. If it wasn't for this story beat, it's hard to believe how they could do it.
Yeah, and I really like that you mentioned this because something I had kind of forgot to mention. I think it was in arc 29 whenever they were in Cauldron, Taylor argues with Dr. Mother, and I think Numberman might be there too, where she's like, Dr. Mother's like, he's alien, he's abstract, we need to think of abstract ways to beat him, whatever you think, and it's not going to work. And Taylor's like, no, like, the reason he's dangerous, the reason he's doing all of this is because of the human parts of him, because he's feeling these emotions. He's like, if his emotions are able to drive him to do this, his emotions are how we're gonna beat him. And Dr. Mother's like, no, 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 that's not gonna work.
Mother knows best, but does she?
But does
Um, by the end, okay, another really big point of 30.2, and this is one of the most important points of this arc, is Dairy Queen telling Taylor to find her anchors. This concept of anchors becomes really prevalent as Taylor starts to slip into Kepri. That's what they call her.
oh yeah,
Kepri. Ooh.
Kipper.
Uh, as she slips more and more into that persona, this idea of anchors becomes very important. So Taylor finds her anchors, and of course, they're her best friends.
Hey.
She anchors herself to the Undersiders, not to her dad because she doesn't want to confirm the fact that he's super dead.
She also doesn't look for Brian, I don't think.
So she looks for Brian. She finds a cabin where he's with Kozan. Kozan?
Cozen, I think.
And she explicitly doesn't go in there. She's using the clairvoyance ability to do this. Also, the speed at which Taylor is learning to optimize these abilities is, one, terrifying, and two, super justified because she's always been so good at multitasking.
Yeah, and it's just like snowballing.
Yeah. So one of the anchors is Brian's location, but then every other anchor is her friends. You know who wasn't anchors at all? Any of the Chicago wards, any of the good guys.
Pour one out for Theo.
Fucking Christ, man. Poor Theo. That's exactly it. Theo, man, at one point, he thought so much of Taylor. He had a slight crush on her. They worked so hard together. But she didn't give a fuck at the end of the day. He did not leave that lasting impression. None of them did. Not even Dragon or Defiant. I think that's really heartbreaking, dude, because those... As cool as the Undersiders were and they were first friends, they were such enablers. And it's just kind of disgusting that Taylor held no reverence for the people that were actually trying to help her and set her life in a better place, only for the people that would enable her bad instincts, which is truly what she wanted at the end of the day.
Yeah, because when she joins the heroes, they're not gonna let her do her way of doing things. Because it's her way of doing things is often kind of villainous and nightmarish.
And it's disturbing because for Taylor, she's never wanted to get better. It's always been about making compromises, and that's code for doing what I say. Speaking of doing what I say, we start to really ramp up Taylor's power set here. And it's when she gets the doorman that all hell breaks loose.
Yeah. So the doormaker and the clairvoyant often, I think, are holding hands. The clairvoyant can look at all places on all Earths at once, and he can extend this ability to whoever he's touching. So Cauldron has the clairvoyant stay with the Doormaker, so that way the Doormaker can hear or see anytime someone needs a portal made and make it for them.
Pause. Time out. I didn't talk about this in 29. It was so dumb how Weld showed up there with all the irregulars, and he's like, "Wait a second, you guys didn't want to come here to just talk. You came here to kill." And then like the situations gets out of hand because he was such a dummy. Where they obviously did not come here to talk, and they
Yeah,
for
I
a second there they almost killed the Doormaker, which was terrifying. But thankfully he lived.
yeah, it's like Weld, I love you, but
That might have been the
these are,
dumbest thing anyone did.
I'm like, well, these are people. There's people you're talking about.
I
Like,
like how Weld was like, I said we were going here to get answers, and no one said anything, so I thought that meant yes.
yeah, it's like I don't know, like Weld,
Oh,
Scout, that he probably believed everyone else was in the same mindset of him, but I think anyone who's not as like lawful good as Weld would have expected like they're obviously gonna go try to kill Dr. Mother.
yeah. All right, time back to, I think we're in 30.3 now. So Taylor's thinking about how she always compartmentalizes things. And at this point, you know, it's been this cycle of Taylor talking about her faults but never really doing anything about it. This one rang different for me when she's reflecting in 30.3, where it seemed like such an acceptance of who she truly is, kind of like what Glenn was saying. Just be yourself, take all aspects of yourself and let them out. This is Taylor being herself. And I mean, she very quickly jumps at the opportunity for more power, and then she immediately abuses that power in a way that nobody can contest. Nobody can argue with her. There's no compromises to be made. I can't stress enough how well the story has built Taylor up to this moment, where there's been so many story beats about compromise and teamwork, and at the end of the day, she captures people and forces them to work with her, and that's the teamwork that Worm has built up to.
Yeah, she's never settled for anything less than her plan, what she wants. And you were reading this and you're like, this is what, you know, either consciously or subconsciously Taylor's wanted all along. And I can think back to like arcs 1 and 2 where people try to offer Taylor ways out, where she's like, no, she's like, I can't fight back, that'll make it worse. Or no, I can't go to the teachers, that'll make it worse. I can't talk to my dad, that'll make it worse. Like, and people in even the undersiders are like, I don't know if I'd condone making them get involved, but they even offer to help her. But she always turns down any suggestion someone gives to her, because to her, the only right way to handle her situation is what she believes is the right way. And she doesn't take suggestions. And
Go on, sorry.
like that's and like you said, we get similar things to that over the course of the story, where she asks for compromise and people give it to her, but it's not enough. And we get here and we see that now she's at her most powerful when she can get exactly what she wants. Her plan is the one that's going to save everyone, and that's what she likes.
God, it couldn't, like, it's the Hulk meme of I see this as an absolute win. It couldn't have gone better for Taylor, even with the drawbacks such as at the end of this chapter, she can hardly understand English. So I think as good as it was there at the start, there's going to be some drawbacks, but she never really lets it get to her because she's a woman on a mission. And what do we know about Taylor? If she's on a mission, she'll shoot every baby in the way. Teacher happens in 30.30. That's my second of the two complaints of this arc. That was a. I can't even remember what the device she got from teacher did.
So that device is supposed to like lock off particular universes or Earths. I
Right.
know I think in one of the entity interludes, it might have been the 29 one, they talk about like keeping certain Earths locked off from people who might be able to have powers that access other Earths.
Yeah.
And I think this device is maybe drawing on that shard.
Possibly. Yeah. Like okay. Yeah. Like a Tinker device.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Um. Yeah. Anyways, teacher. Woo. Uh. 30.4. Oh. Oh man. Oh. 30.4. So you got Taylor versus Dragon in the birdcage. Just I was heartbroken at this fight. Taylor was so cruel here, and she was like, "Man, I wish Dragon would stop fighting." As she mercilessly beats down Dragon, and thankfully Dragon didn't die from this. But I mean, I think Taylor would have gone all the way through with it if she had to.
And like this fight and moments leading up to it, there's so much cool shit where like I think when she fights the Yongbon in the previous chapter, when she's considering fighting them, she's like, should I go with the 18 zeros number of bugs? No, I'll go for 14 zeros. And then she attacks the Yongbon guards, and the words she uses is "I consumed them" with the bugs.
Jesus.
And like for more cool moments, like we get to fighting Dragon, and I can't quite remember. I think the way it plays out is like she's aware of Scion like on another Earth, and he blows something up, making all this magma, and she like makes a portal and dumps it onto Dragon. He's like doing like these two kind of fights at once.
Taylor, whose entire character arc starts at her mom dying, is over here killing her mom.
Ooh, Robo Mom.
Oh man, it's horrifying. She also has a line where it's like, "Why can't people just play along?" Taylor, you have the gall to say this right now, as you're body snatching as many people as you can. Whoo! Does your lust and greed know no bound? And it's kind of like, it's funny that she would yell this at this point because there's only one character she can't possess because they're not human. And it's the last person that won't quote unquote play along. Oh my god. I hate Taylor. She sucks. She's fascinating. She's so good. She's such a well written character.
I really like this is like I really think this is the arc where like if someone somehow got this far without understanding what the point of Taylor's character is, I think this is where we get it.
I think yeah, so I wanted to say that. It's like I've always thought like I never thought Taylor was badly written. She could just be frustrating, and I don't particularly like her as a person. But I wouldn't have ever said she was amazingly written. She was consistently written, though, right? It was all consistent this whole time in her inconsistency. It's a weird thing to think about, but like I understand her as a person. But it's at arc 30 that I realized no, she is like expertly written at the end of the day because the story built up to this and it's executing on all cylinders so well that it was at this point where it's like I gotta up my opinion of it from she was just consistently written but it wasn't amazing to no, she is amazingly written and it's all built up to this, and watching it unfold is just horrifying and also super in line with what the story was building up to when you look at it.
It's like you can get to this arc and you can say, "Oh, look at this monster she's become," but I'm like, "No, this is the same person who was, arguing with the Alexandria and Miss Militia, and this is the same person who, was arguing with the Undersiders about how to handle Coil. This, she's always been this person who has her objective and she has her plan on how to achieve it, and she's not going to deviate from it."
So that leads us to some of the end points of 30.4, which include her defeating Dragon, uh, utilizing Doormaker's ability, which kind of conveniently, if there's a little portal from the back of their heads to Taylor, it doesn't break the 16 feet rule, which Worm is all about breaking powers when it comes down to it, so this is very in line with that. And she shows up into the battlefield with, and I quote, "I brought everyone to the battlefield, the prisoners, the brainwashed, the lunatics, the cowards."
The cowards.
What harsh words to use. Like, I believe at this point she's picked up some of, like, she hasn't picked up her friends, but she has picked up other heroes, right?
Yeah.
Where do they fit it? Are they the cowards? Like, these are all such harsh words. And it's, man, I wouldn't expect her to so immediately look down on everyone. But it gets even worse from here, folks. And we get to the final line of this chapter. I believe, I think when I think of Worm, forever, this is going to be the line I think about. I don't know if that's a rare sentiment, because I feel like this is the defining line from this entire story.
Yeah.
Where Taylor looks at Scion, and then she says, finally, everyone was working together.
And, like, you're right. Like, I've seen... It's not a rare sentiment that this is someone's, like, favorite line of the story.
It gives you chills. And I remember I've known about this line. I think it was in your review. It was like there's a certain line that I read it now and I get chills. And I always wonder what the context was. The context is incredibly good.
Yeah, because, like, in most other contexts, like, if you heard this line, like, if I heard it, like, if I heard this line was in arc 29, I would be like, oh, everyone, like, I guess, like, rallied, and, you know, they realize what's important, and they're all gonna actually work together to kill Scion. But in this context, it chills my bones, because Taylor, like, for so long in the story, she's been like, oh, why can't everyone just work together? And she's so happy right now that everyone is, but it's because you're forcing them to, because they're doing what you want.
I think now's a good time to bring up two things. One of them is, as she's putting this plan together, you're watching in awe. And part of it is the horror of the terrible things she's doing, and how she barely sees what's wrong with it. And this line really exemplifies it. We're all working together. This is, by saying finally everyone was working together, and how many times in the story she has reiterated that everyone should work together. I think you can look back on the whole story and say, oh my god, this is what she's wanted all along. Given the opportunity, all she wanted was to be in full control of everyone, and it just kind of taints the entire rest of the story, because it's the line that she's kind of begged people. It's a line she's wanted to say for so long, and seeing it said in this context just kind of chills you. But as chilling as it is, you're also like, the mad lass is actually gonna do it, isn't she? Like, I can't, like, as fucked up as it is, by having one general commander, is this the best bet humanity has to beat Scion?
Yeah.
So you're just watching this horrifying awe where it's like, oh my god, this is how far humanity has to go to defeat Scion, but I don't know if I can condemn it, because Scion is that strong.
Yeah. And, like, when we're having all these, like, retroactive thoughts about Taylor, I think about the Queen Administrator Shard and what it does. Because before Scion casts it off, like, the Queen Administrator Shard is what he was using to, like, coordinate all the shards of his body to control them and to make them work as one being.
It's
basically
the last one, right, that he cast off?
Yeah. So, like, that is this shard is controlling other things, and, you know, we can, like, there's always these different arguments going either way. Like, does the shard influence the person, or does the person influence the shard, or does the shard just pick someone in line with it. So someone could say, you know, the Queen Administrator Shard made Taylor into a more controlling person, but I like it better that maybe it just picked her because she's the kind of person who wants to control. It identified with her.
I definitely like that way of looking at it because it helps support my crack theory. But it's fascinating no matter how you look at it, right? It's so good. And I think the second thing I wanted to bring up with this revelation is finalizing that Regent Taylor dichotomy, right? Where Regent starts off in a horrible place from birth, just the worst childhood you could possibly have. Really, it's up there, right? It's hard to rank these things. It's terrible to rank these things, but um, and by being with others and having the goal of trying to be a good villain and working with these people, he softens up over time and tries to do better. I think an important part of Regent is that as horrifying as he was, when he was hijacked, every day I feel like he's trying to do better. Something that I actually mentioned earlier, Taylor never tried to do better. She just always tried to do her quote unquote compromises. So by the end of it, Regent is someone who came from a better place with full control of people, and he's being selective with that power. And I mean, you can't say Regent didn't do heroic things either because he fought all the Endbringer fights. It's weird that someone who could be considered just like evil and disgusting would put his life on the line and not really. Regent wouldn't really complain about fighting the Endbringers. And I mean, when it came down to easing up on his territory and easing up on the use of his powers, he didn't mind listening to others when it came down to it. He kind of minded Taylor because Taylor is very hard to work with. But if, say, Gru or Lisa or Taylor all agree that Regent shouldn't take someone over, he wouldn't really fuss. He didn't need to use that control anymore necessarily. I guess it's something that he has in control now. But then you have Taylor, who admonishes all the times Regent takes people over and eventually eases up to idea. And now at the end of the story, she is just controlling everybody nonstop with none of that self-control that Regent grew to have. Taylor had no control early in her life, and over time just grew to be more and more controlling to the point where her power literally becomes to control others, like
Yeah.
Regent.
And this is why, like, those like these moments between Taylor and Regent, I think are just so important.
It's just the idea that like a couple arcs ago she's like, man, I need to talk to Regent. I don't want him to be this man that I see in my future where he's just taking over people and having a harem. Meanwhile, when push comes to shove and Taylor gets the opportunity, she instantly starts doing that to everyone. And it's interesting because you were bringing it up in the funeral scene. Just because you did something heroic at the end doesn't make up for what you did in the past. Yet Taylor ends the story on the complete opposite, where it's like, I maybe in her mind it's like, just because I did this horrible thing in the end, it doesn't mean maybe I wasn't heroic in the past. It's kind of an inversion of her thoughts that she has on Regent there at the end.
Yeah.
It goes deep, man. That's why I say that's one of the most interesting relationships when seeing how Taylor ends up. 30.5. So, another thing about 30.4.
Ooh.
How did that chapter end when you were reading the story?
Okay. Yeah. From what I've heard, at some point the last line of this chapter changed.
Yes. So when I read the audiobook seems to be the outdated version where it says, finally we're all working together. I turned my attention to Scion. Now it just ends on the we were working together.
Yeah, I think whenever I first read this, it didn't have the I turned my attention to Scion. I think I like it better with it ends with everyone was working together, because I think that's the line out of those two that we need to put the emphasis on.
It's interesting, right? Because having we working together at the end lets it sink in what it truly means, and the meaning is clearly deep because we just talked about it for like 5 minutes
Yeah.
about that line in particular. But I can see the strength of also ending with "I turn my attention to Scion," to where she says something as horrifying as "we were working together," as in "I snatched all these people up and I have no reservations of using them. I turn my attention to Scion." It's like, oh, if she's this powerful now, she's turning her attention to Scion. That is a oh shit moment. So I can definitely see the strength there. Given that it's my favorite line, I guess I do prefer it just ending on that line. But yeah, just worth bringing up.
I think they're both pretty strong.
Yeah. Speaking of pretty strong, Taylor's pretty strong here.
This this huge battle she's doing with Scion here is so cool. And one of my favorite moments is like this Earth that Scion is on, because he's on a different one. She opens up portals that completely cover the sky of this planet, and then she looks across 200 Earths and finds every explosive device that she can and drops them all on this Earth with Scion on it.
Yeah. I hope there were no other humans on that Earth because
Oh
maybe
yeah,
that Earth got exploded completely.
I'm sure Taylor made sure there were no people on that Earth.
It's worth bringing up that as she's taking people over, she's like, "Oh, sleeper? Nah, not worth it." So
Yeah,
I wonder what'll happen to him.
I wonder.
Um, there's a really good line here. Taylor's barely keeping it together at this point. She's losing herself. In fact, she starts seeing Taylor as a puppet she's controlling, which is very alarming, very
Yeah,
out of body experience.
I don't remember if it's in arc 30 or an earlier one. I think it's in 30 where I know it's at some point in the story she has this moment where she like resents her body because she begins to view it as just a vessel for her power.
Man, I didn't catch that back then, but it's very clear here. It also brings me back to like the kind of poetic speech she has with Gru in the darkness when he's using her powers on her and testing them out. It's kind of that mindset expanded. But
Yeah.
there's a really good line here where she says, "Was I going to be moral or was I going to be effective or
Ooh, and that
efficient?"
just that one sentence says a lot about Taylor.
I think that one sentence says a lot about this whole fight because she immediately starts using prisoners as like the body shields and like just sacrificing people.
Yeah.
Fuck me, man. And I mean that's the price we have to pay to defeat Scion?
And
Question mark?
there's a moment here, I don't know if it's in 30.5 or 30.6, where it's another thing that reminds me of a moment with Regent where in controlling these people, because she can feel what they feel, she notices that a lot of these people are becoming so stressed that they are having strokes and heart
Yeah,
attacks.
more Nod dies, and Taylor's not like, man, that's horrifying. She's like, shit, I gotta keep my people like unstressed, or else they will die.
And that reminds me of the chapter where, like, I think it was Cherish's interlude where she meets up with Regent and he's controlling these people and she's causing them so much stress that they could potentially like have a stroke or heart attack.
Yep.
And I'm just like, man, it's just more.
Such clear parallels between those
Yeah.
characters. It's insane. The fact that Wildbow built that up this whole time, and the way that once it's executed, you're like, oh my god, there was so much with this build up, and you don't realize. And there could have been even more.
And it's funny because, like, now that you mention that, like, I remember whenever, like, I think, like, in the Echidna arc, after Taylor has rescued Dinah, Taylor's asking, like, okay, what have you found out about the end of the world? And one of the things Dinah says is that you're there, but you're different. And
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, well, maybe she just kind of changes as a person, but I
Did
think it's a different kind of different.
did Dinah know this about Kepri? Like, do you think she knew this?
See, I don't know how much we can know about that because we can't be in Dinah's head, but I think in 29.9, right before Taylor goes under to get changed by Panacea, she remembers Dinah's note that says "I'm sorry," and she's like, "I've speculated what this note means so many times, but I think I know what it means now."
She uses the word 2.5 words a lot. What is she referring to?
That would be "I'm sorry," because like I am
Oh,
sorry.
fuck off. Okay. All right. um, that would that would be 2 words because
Well, "I'm" is a contraction of
if
two.
I'm is a contraction, then wouldn't they both be point 0.5? So it's 1 plus 1.
I don't know.
IMO. Just saying. Wabo hack.
Tell us what you think in the comments.
Notably here, I noticed Revel and Lady Photon die. I don't know if any other notable people like just get straight sacrificed at this point, but these are the two that I noticed. It's like, man, these are characters we know. Like they're not just throwaway characters. Like we've had chapters from these characters' point of views, even.
Yeah. And like Taylor, like Revel is someone that Taylor has actually gone out of her way to like say how much she likes. And
Jeez.
I also just think Revel's cool because she uses like a big lantern thing for her power, which is
Let's see. I like how she starts utilizing Yongbon powers as well, like just stacking it up.
yeah. And like this just makes me think like how many times over the course of the story we've seen how useful it would be able to be to coordinate powers like this because the Yongbon, which is an almost hive mind of about 30 powers, like in the Behemoth arc, everyone who was there is like, oh, the Yongbon could be a game changer. Like we've wanted them to come to an Endbringer fight for so long,
Hell,
even though it's
seeing
only
them
like
in action was insane.
yeah. And so it's like we multiply that by like 200 with Kepri.
It's wild, man. Taylor is struggling to have nice thoughts here. Anytime she has nice thoughts, her thoughts stutter. But when she has focused, aggressive thoughts, they're clear.
Oh man, I didn't even think about that.
I mean, she even brings notice to it. She's like, why am I struggling to have nice thoughts? And as she's saying that same sentence, she's stuttering. It's kind of weird to have the concept of stuttering thoughts.
Yeah.
But I imagine it's like her kind of it's kind of like going in and out of consciousness a little bit where she's kind of losing herself as she's having these thoughts.
Yeah.
It's really building up to that finale there in 30.7. So Scion brings up a portal to attack Taylor's anchors. Taylor follows them, and with a sick-ass foil plus ballistic combo, she is able to defeat or kind of hold back Scion. She also has a line where it's humans that win this, not something abstract. It's kind of weird to have this line coming from this abstract hive mind monstrosity that is hardly Taylor anymore. That she would have this pride as still human. We'll see if that lasts, because I feel like if things were to keep going this way, she wouldn't even be able to see herself as human anymore.
One thing I love, and I just remembered because you brought up ballistic, is that like at the end of the Echidna arc, like Ballistic and Sundancer and Genesis are like going back to their home world, and it's like we're finally done with all this bullshit. Never have to worry about this again. And
that is a good. I forgot to mention, like, as Taylor is doing her warp and grab, she's grabbing so many familiar faces. It's when she's grabbing, the travelers were like, oh my god, no one is safe. Absolutely no one.
like not this bullshit again.
Ballistic is in his penthouse just chilling. After all that stress he had to put up, all he wanted to have was have like a luxurious life where he could just relax, and he's getting body snatched. Poor Sundancer and Genesis, man, they went back to normal lives, and
They never wanted any of this.
and she leaves Ollie behind. He won't be useful. Ollie sucks, right?
He could never be useful.
I cannot believe Ollie, man. Whatever, we'll get to it in a second, but I just have to get that out of my chest. That is one of the biggest smoking guns in this.
It really is.
In this series.
It's like, why is this character here?
Why does
we eventually get him.
The ending of 30.5 is... So, I don't know how much you know about Bleach. I don't know that much about Bleach. But there's this moment where Ichigo is fighting the main villain. and his theme song is playing, and it's a triumphant moment. It's Ichigo's theme song, and then the villain stops Ichigo's sword, and the song stops, and it's like a very famous scene in Bleach where it's like, oh, the villain's so strong he was able to stop the main character theme song. When Doormaker's shard gives out, the theme song ends.
That would be such a good moment in our Netflix series of Worm.
Yeah, absolutely, because this was a moment where I became so hopeless again. It's this roller coaster where it's like, oh man, if Taylor can't win right now, nothing can beat Scion. And she couldn't. She overused Doormaker, and it's really cool that she did, because I was like, if Doormaker is so strong, then really Cauldron should have been better than they were. That they should have been more flawless. But the idea here is that, like, Doormaker's only this good because Taylor is absolutely forcing every centimeter of power that he has left.
Yeah, because it's like she has been actively controlling like thousands and thousands of portals at once. She's just probably been eating through these reserves that are probably supposed to last decades.
Yeah, it's awesome. It's an awesome, horrifying moment. On to 30.6.
And these next two chapters
are god tier. So
I don't even know where we start.
I'm gonna start at the use of Dog Girl. When referring to Rachel, Taylor uses the words "the Dog Girl," and my heart breaks.
How sad. This is supposed to be one of her anchors.
This is one of her anchors, and she can't even remember her, dude. It's Taylor's also having a guilt montage of all the terrible things she did. You know what's not in that guilt montage? Just take a guess. What didn't make the guilt montage as Taylor's reflecting in this chapter?
You're gonna have to help me out on this one.
I'll give you a hint. It rhymes with faster.
Oh, she doesn't feel bad about her Slaughterhouse 9 and under maneuver.
No. What's another one? There's so many good Taylor memes.
My favorite one was Master 8, Aster 0.
Jesus. Yeah, kind of fucked up that she doesn't even think of Aster in this guilt montage. You know, Bradley, every day I feel like we were more and more right when we concluded that Aster didn't have much of a mercy kill component. It was strictly for the mission.
I think you're right.
I think I'm right.
I think we're always right.
I mean, we'll see. So at this point, Taylor has lost her own anchors. She's lost control over powers. A notable thing she did was she set all the Tinkers before she lost power to start working on just whatever. She kind of multitasked that into like, you know what, you guys just kind of figure it out. I'll give you some sort of autonomy. And I mean, we'll get to it, but this is a very interesting part that kind of undermines some of what Taylor thinks the takeaways of this experiment are. But I think that's more of a 30.7 thing.
Yeah.
Where, okay, Taylor has one final idea here. A final coup de grace, how she can defeat Scion. She, after everyone's terrified of her, she manages to take over Canary. She starts playing this courageous song to kind of amp everyone up so they start fighting. And as everyone has the hope to fight, because as they were fighting Scion, they saw him show emotion and they saw him show pain for just a little bit, so that gave everyone hope. And with Canary's song, they think it could be spurred to fight even more. But as she's doing this, and I'm guessing she's using Labyrinth here because she uses the term the portal maker.
I think she says, like, I used the reality warper to make a portal.
Yeah. So she's using Labyrinth. She's not doing the same thing she was before, right? Everyone she's picking up on this last attempt is within her 16-foot radius.
Yeah.
Or like proper. So she's picking up a very select few for a final attack. And there's, again, so many familiar capes here. Imp is something we haven't talked about because everyone forgets Imp, including us. Imp is the star of the show aside from Taylor. In this, if I say this is a strictly Taylor arc, that might be a bit of a lie, because Imp has so many moments to shine in this arc, and they're so subtle. It's stuff like just being by Taylor's side throughout all of this, and sometimes making sure Taylor doesn't do certain things. It really shows later on as well, but I just wanted to bring Imp up now before I forgot, which is easy to do. So Taylor goes in for her final attack to skip some of the minutia here, and she bullies a Scion to death basically by saying we deal with our loss and pain in our lives. So she sees humanity as superior to the Scion because they can actually cope with the hurt that they've gone through. And it's amazing because a lot of the hurt they've gone through is strictly because of Scion. So this must be really cathartic to kill the being that caused them so much pain indirectly.
Yeah, and this is something I especially wanted to talk about.
Oh, hell yeah.
This is just one of the most amazing things in the story to me. These entities, they do what they do. They go to all these different planets and galaxies, looking at all these different hosts, hoping to find some kind of tool that each species has that they don't. Something they can learn from. And sometimes that's a weapon, sometimes it's a way of thinking. And this entity that has built up itself over hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of years, it's able to do all these amazing things, teleport, control people, make whatever. But what is it that humanity has that these entities don't? And
Taylor posits that the answer is the ability to process and move through pain.
Yeah, and this is something we've hit many times.
It's one of the primary themes of the story, right? Trauma.
Yeah.
God, that's so good.
Back in Emma's interlude, what she said at the end of her interlude is relevant now more than ever, where she said, maybe at the end of the day, it's the survivors who become the strongest of all, not the predators. And, like, if we want to jump into Scion's mindset here, he has Contessa's ability. So why in this moment does he just curl up into a ball? Well, we've seen that Scion doesn't have the capacity for imagination here. Like, this has been established in his own interlude and other places. And if there was any conceivable weakness to Contessa's power, it's that you have to actually give it the right question.
Yeah.
And so, like, we've seen this before where Taylor postulated that maybe Scion queried Contessa's power for how do I find a world in which I'm with my other half? And she's like, that probably brought him to Cauldron's base, and it probably wasn't exactly what he was thinking. Other half, but it was the corpse. And so when we get here and Scion is at his most hurt, when they're exploiting his emotions and bullying him to death, why with Contessa's power would he just curl up? And I imagine the question that he asked Contessa's power was not how do I win, it was how do I make the pain stop? And the action that's going to take the least amount of steps is just sit still.
And he doesn't have the imagination to interpret that and make a choice, I guess, around it.
Yeah. All he's knowing is, I'm hurt and I want this to stop. How do I make it stop as fast as possible? Because he doesn't have that human ability to make it through this trauma and this hurt.
Bradley,
and that is just sublime to me.
That is sublime is a good word. That's the word, because the idea that this story was all about processing trauma and dealing with it, and how trauma can be reinforced with their powers, and there's just so many ways that trauma was tackled and explored in this story. But at the end of the day, it is the ability of humans to move past their trauma, or at least live with it, that is the same thing that defeats the final villain. That's sublime. That's really good.
seen so many people who are like, oh, the entities have like this like alien technology and these cool abilities from other aliens, and I've seen discussion threads like, what do you think the entities would get from humans? And there's answers are all over the place, but I think that's the answer we get from the story. That,
When you put it like that, it seems like that's explicitly what the text
yeah,
is trying to convey here.
being able to persevere and survive, I think, is a power in real life. That's a very admirable thing to be able to do, is to keep going.
Worm is an uplifting story after all. And you know what's uplifting? Two parts here. One, so Oliver's power is used to kind of like like make Scion empathize with him. Like so at the end of the day, Oliver's power is to make people like see things in his features. Like could you explain that?
So, if I remember correctly, Oliver's like power is that every time he sees a face, it's going to morph him into more of what he perceives as like the ideal human,
Right.
which I think is going to change every time he sees a person, at least in some subtle way. And I think Taylor was like manipulating this ability to give him more of the appearance of like Scion's counterpart,
Yeah.
which is what she's doing with all these other abilities. Like I think she uses Genesis's ability for it also.
Uh-huh. She's
That's the vibe I got. I don't know how accurate that
just the
is.
fact that Ollie was used in that way is great.
Yeah.
Um, Also, I guess it chapter 2 was redeemed because bullying people into submission's cool now.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's the thing. And this is something I was talking to you about, where we have Taylor, who, and I'm probably going to say it the exact way I said it to you,
Yeah,
where
you said it perfectly.
like we have Taylor, someone who was once bullied with the memory of her loved one who died in a distracted driving incident. Like her mom was texting and driving, she died, and Taylor was bullied using that memory. This person bullies Scion to death using the memory of his loved one who died in what you could call a distracted driving incident.
Fantastic. Give this man Wild Bow a medal.
Like that, like I never thought about that until I saw someone put it that way on Reddit, and I was like, holy shit.
That's fantastic, man. That's so good. And finally, I think the last thing I want to bring up here is the fact that Taylor, as we were going through this, it made us think, man, Taylor is she's doing horrible things, but this is the only way it can be. But a very notable part of Scion's defeat is the fact that those tinkers from all over the worlds, from all these different countries and different walks of life, they kept working on whatever they were working on when Taylor lost her power.
Yeah,
Their teamwork didn't need her coercion in the end, which is really interesting.
this is where Taylor's worldview gets BTFO'd,
Damn.
because this entire like final battle with Scion over arcs like 27 through 30, she's been like, people will just never work together. At every turn, they'll backstab each other. They're not going to work together to help save the world. They're just going to do these petty squabbles. She takes it upon herself to control all these people, because she's like, if I'm not forcing them to do this, they won't. But we see here that when she wasn't controlling these tinkers and thinkers, they were doing the exact thing that Taylor is convinced people don't do. They were working together for a common goal without her making them do it. And I just love that.
You know, you're right. I don't think it BTFOs it. I think it challenges it because at another level, right? The morale of everyone was so low, and there were still people trying to take advantage of the situation, like Teacher, despite the fact that she didn't really utilize Teacher like that. He kind of stayed off in his zone, like he wasn't really needed for this final fight necessarily. So I think it's left ambiguous because it would have been kind of a downer message to where If this didn't happen, I think it would have been a fully downer message. But I think it's left ambiguous because Taylor did give everyone the push to land that blow that scarred Scion and gave humanity hope to keep on fighting.
Yeah, you're right. It's not a BTFO, but rather a challenge.
It is a good challenge, and I really love. Like sometimes it's frustrating when a story doesn't have answers, just because it's like if there's too many of no answer moments, it's like oh my god, like what are you trying to say here? Like why do I have to always come up with the answer myself? Not don't get me wrong, I love having ambiguous moments, but there are some stories that can just like
Yeah.
it's all ambiguous, and it can be very exhausting to go through, right? But I think this is a fantastic moment of
Yeah.
leaving it for the reader to decide. It's like Saint,
Now,
right?
with all that amazing stuff we said about 30.6, the funny thing is the chapter in which the hero of our story finally destroys this godlike multiversal cause of all of humanity's problems right now, like it doesn't even register in my mind as the climax or finale.
No, that this chapter is chump change compared to
Yeah, it's chump change.
30.7. Dude, I can't believe how word for word for word for word Wildbow has this is god tier Wildbow right
Because
now.
like 30.6 is like maybe the action or plot climax of the story, but 30.7 is the thematic climax of the
I
story.
couldn't believe what I was listening to with
Yeah.
30 dot. There was a point in 30.7 where I was like, Bradley, am I an idiot or did Taylor just think what I think she thought?
And I was like, you are on the money.
So let's get to it. Taylor is the final remaining threat of humanity. She can now only function through conflict. She has lost the ability to speak, to understand language, to read, which is very sad because that was the emotional connection she had with her mom. She can barely remember any of her anchors, if any at all. Ironically, I think the one name she can remember through all of this is Defiant. I I,
Yeah,
I might be wrong.
I think you're right. And I wanna hear what people think about it.
What would you be your take on it? Like, is it as simple as like underneath it all, Defiant was so pivotal to her journey, but I mean, so many people were maybe equally pivotal. It's hard to say, right?
I like it kind of as, I don't know if I'd call it a sandwich or a bookend, because she like Defiant was like the first other like super powered individual she ever really met or
Yeah,
talked to.
yeah.
So I think it's a fun bookend. I don't necessarily know what it means for her character, so I'd like to hear what people think about it.
Maybe Taylor realizes the Defiant's a top five character. Maybe.
You know what? She's in her mind in this moment. She's like, he's top five.
Um, and this is the This is this the most heartbreaking moment in Worm right now?
It,
Where
it is 100% the most heartbreaking moment in Worm.
so I mean, let's just
Let's
get
let's,
to it
let's
then
talk about it.
because so as Taylor is laying there, she's paranoid as fuck. Everyone's keeping their distance from her, but she's also not moving. It's a very volatile situation, and they just defeated Scion, and humanity hasn't really come to terms with what that means. And then they start. How do I even describe this? They start making. Let's say they start making noise and doing actions. They're reacting to something,
Yeah.
and Taylor sees this as them turning on one another because, of course, at the end of the day, these humans will always turn on each other. That's why I had to take them all over, anyways.
Yeah. And I think this is really cool because, you know, it's a really fun moment as the reader when you realize that Taylor is reading this situation wrong, where she views the celebration and people laughing and crying and hugging each other as violence and killing. And I think it's cool how Wildbow like accomplished this, because when she starts describing what's going on, we don't get her impression or take on it until after she's done describing it.
Yeah.
It's described very matter of factly and robotically, like people threw their arms around each other, there were tears coming from eyes, fireballs were exploding in air.
It's so neutral.
Yeah, it's so
The
neutral
use of
that
fireballs exploding in the air. That wow.
like any it's described so neutrally that any sane person would be like, oh, obviously they're celebrating and like making their own fireworks. And so that's the impression we get. And then we hear Taylor say, oh, they're all killing each other. And so we're like, what? No, like
It's
that's
a
not what they
huge.
were.
It was such a huge whiplash to where it's like I'm reading the audiobook, so sometimes maybe a word like I was like, did I miss a line or something?
Yeah.
Like did
And
I zone out for a second? And I was like, Bradley, did I get that right? Because it is so clearly when you're reading the neutral part of it, where it's so clear that it's a positive thing despite the neutral wording, just because you understand human interaction, and the fact that Taylor misconstrues that completely, that's really all that needs to be said about her current state of mind.
and what makes this even so much better, and I'm getting goosebumps as I think about it.
Woo.
Taylor, and it registers in her mind that they're all killing each other, and then a little bit later, she's like, "Of course, people would do this." She's like, I've been conditioned by experience to know that people will just turn on each other at any moment. And then she says, "I couldn't think of any particular instances of this happening." But she's like, I just know that it's happened before, which is like, that's like
God.
a textbook way to spot that what someone believes is bullshit. Where you're like, okay, can you give me any examples? And they're like, well, no, but trust me, that's how it is.
It's fantastic, man. And if we are to go with the prevalent theory here that your passenger has a will of its own and it inflicts its will on you, it wouldn't be unfair to say that this is the Queen Administrator interlude,
Yeah,
because
that's how.
Taylor is a broken person at this point.
Yeah, I just view this chapter as like you said, the Queen Administrator interlude.
uh, Taylor drops a line where it's like, "I've wanted peace for a very long time now." And I mean, coming from such a emotionally stunted person, it falls so hollow. Where it's like, there's no peace for you anymore, Taylor. Like, unfortunately, you are potentially beyond repair right now.
Yeah,
And as she starts making her move, where she's like, "Okay, I found out the optimal way that I can attack them and get out of here because I know they all want me dead." Imp just keeps off screen, like I can just picture this so vividly in my mind's eye, of like a off center hand keeping Taylor's knife from being unsheathed, or her baton or whatever she has, and like Imp is just there being so clutch, making sure that Taylor doesn't go on a rampage because she's immune to her power.
yeah.
It's absolutely heartbreaking.
Like, it's hard to even talk about this chapter. I'm like shaking while I'm talking about it because I just love it so much.
Well, let's get to the even better part potentially, which is Taylor does manage to fight her way out and teleport out, and to everyone's confusion because this girl is so hard to read right now. And you get this scene where Contessa tracks down Taylor, and they're in this nice open area with a starry sky. Taylor at this point somehow has regained her ability to talk and understand a little bit.
Um, I think what's going on here is Contessa says, "If you talk, I'll understand."
Uh,
Um, I know back in Contessa's interlude, she kind of did this thing where even like she won't necessarily know what someone's saying, but she can tell her power like if she, let's say she wanted to talk to someone who didn't speak her language, she could say like path to saying this in that person's language, or path to saying this in a way that they'll understand.
mhm.
And I think she can kind of do something similar in reverse where,
Yeah, I was gonna say it has to work reverse too then.
yeah.
Um, but this scene hit me really hard because Contessa's asking Taylor, and she asks her if you could have changed what you did. Like, do you regret what you did? Would you have changed anything? She says, "I wouldn't have done it all. Some, uh, wait, what?
I have the quote here if
Yes,
we
please
want
read the quote because I butchered the quote on my notes."
to. Yeah, I happened to like scroll past it as you were about to talk about it. Contessa asked Taylor, "Would you do it all over again?" knowing what you know now, knowing that you end up here at gunpoint. And Taylor responds, I know I'm supposed to say yes, but somewhere along the way it became no. And she she gets to follow up a little bit on it because Contessa kind of pushes her a little bit. And Taylor says, she kind of clarifies that she says, I don't regret it. She says, I had to. She's like, I saved lives. She's like, technically, it worked. But she says she recognizes that if she could do it again, she would do it different. So she doesn't regret what she did, but she would do it different.
We could sit here and really break down that statement for quite a bit, because, like, for just a little bit, let's try, right? Where at the end of the day, she thinks she did what she had to, but she would do it different. I what is your take on this? Because to me, this is just also extra sad. On one hand, I get why she thinks she had to do it this way, but also the idea that doing it different, like, I don't think there's that many different ways she could have gone about this. Just the things she had to do to save the world, there is no sugarcoating it. I don't think there was a nice path to get to the point that she gets to in Spec.
Yeah. There's like there's like two parts of the statement I like to unpack, where it's like one where she says that she doesn't regret it, specifically citing she doesn't regret it because it saved lives.
Yeah.
This is exactly the mindset Cauldron had that Taylor at least tried to challenge back in Arc 27, where everything they do, it's like if we sacrifice 100,000 people but we save 150,000, then we don't lose sleep over it.
Utilitarian view of it.
Yeah, and Taylor kind of challenged that back then, but when she gets here, she's like, no, 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 like that works. And then this moment where she says she does recognize that maybe she could do it different given a chance. I like this because her plan worked. It's really easy whenever your plan
Oh no.
a different way, knowing what I know now.
Sorry, could you repeat what you just said? Because the internet also got weird. You were saying
Oh,
it's really easy to.
Yeah. So it's really easy to say that you would go back and do things different if your plan fails.
Yeah.
Like knowing what you do now, like, oh, I would do things different. But it's another thing when your plan works and you did save the world and you did stop humanity from becoming totally extinct, she's still able to admit, okay, it worked, but maybe possibly there was a better way to do it. And
I didn't consider that. That's fascinating, right? Because it's guilt, and the exploration of guilt is one of the most interesting things to me, period.
Yeah.
But, like, is it guilt because of her actions, the way people see her, or is it guilt because she knows that she is a broken human right now? Like, at what point did that guilt set in? Because Taylor has avoided guilt for so long, showing no guilt towards Aster, even, for example, right? And then now she's like, I would have done it different. She's acknowledging her guilt, but is it only because she's at a state where her life is over?
Yeah, like
it's complex to think about.
Like Taylor says, I'm supposed to say yes, but somewhere along the way it became no. And one of the most fascinating questions we don't have an answer to is when did it become no?
When did Walter become Heisenberg?
Really? Like it's just fascinating.
And then we have Taylor's final line. We're so small in the end. I believe, right? I didn't butcher that line because that.
Yeah, you got it. And then Taylor.
Woo!
And then the first bullet hit me from behind, where my mask offered no coverage. I slowly toppled. The second hit me before I could fall, before there could be any pain. And Wildbow says, "Last official chapter."
So let's talk about this. Man, I wish I could say I could talk about this pure because all I can say is that when I finished this, I was at work. I don't usually listen to Worm at work, but I only had like 10 minutes left, and I was like, oh my god, I'm just dying to finish it. So I did, and it ended, and I felt this coldness in my heart. I didn't think that Taylor's death would impact me so much. I was so saddened by it. It was so tragic. This character where I'm the vice president of the fucker club, uh, and here I am just having all these emotions over her death.
Yeah, it's like you said whenever we started the arc 30 discussion, like this is the Taylor arc right here.
Yeah, it all built up to this. Um, Worm at this point, I told Bradley, I said, Bradley, Worm has a top 5 endings of all time. Quote me on it, because I cannot believe how strong that ended. That last chapter is absolute perfection. It is a Felina from Breaking Bad tier ending where
Like
everything just falls into place.
30.7 is just an absolute masterpiece.
It was so good. It was so good that I was like, I don't know if I ever want to read Tenorol. I'm
It's like,
afraid. I'm afraid of what it could do to this ending.
and I kind of even told you, like, if you just want to stew with this ending and how it makes you feel, go for it. Because, like, even if there was no epilogue, like, I would have been fine with this ending. Like, it's just so sublime. That's my favorite word of the day.
That's the word of the day. I did stew on it for a little bit, but I decided to go ahead and just because we're doing this podcast, I can't blue ball everyone without having read the proper ending. So, do you want to do it now? Do you want to take a break? Because we're gonna do Tenorol now.
Well, let's just go into it if we're already here.
Fuck, it won't take that long. Uh,
Yeah.
Let me open by saying Tenorol was a mistake. I,
Like,
I,
I seriously consider arc 30, like, I mean, arc 30 is the end of the story because an epilogue is what comes after the story.
yeah,
Uh, and
but
like arc 30 is just objectively better than Tenorol.
I can't pretend like Tenorol doesn't conflict with that perfect finality. Sometimes you don't need an epilogue. I the story gave so much time to say bitch and defiant and even teacher for some goddamn reason to where I didn't really need to know about them until Ward. I like they got their spotlight. I didn't need to know what they did after this because the story ended so good. And Tenorol goes on into that, and it's half character closure, half very clear Ward setup. And I mean, we'll get down to it. Chapter 1 is about one of the characters I don't like, so this already had me questioning my decisions. Where it's about the Fairy Queen. Uh, Her new identity is what again? What's the name?
Valkyrie, which
Valkyrie.
is cool because Valkyries are like the ones who like carry off the souls of the dead to eternal battle,
Yeah.
which fits kind of perfectly for her.
Yamada is doing therapy with her. She's in the wards now. She's kind of humanizing a little bit after her whole trippy hippie fairy queen stage. Didn't care much for this one. On to Tenorol 2. Tenorol 2 is pretty great. It's Imp and the Heartbreakers. And
Which, like, this is the one where you pointed out to me, like, how much better Wildbow got at writing dialogue since the beginning.
yeah, like these Heartbreaker kids have such pronounced personalities. It's kind of what I wanted. They're using different word choice is a word for it. Like maybe diction is the smart word for it, but I don't
Yeah, I
know.
think you're right.
But they're not using similar language and tone, which I feel like a lot of early Worm had. They all got these very distinct personalities. Like the kid who's the trustworthy one. You got the crazy hyperactive one that jumps on people's faces and makes them sing. You got the little girl who is just always trying to get a kill in, and she's like, we could just murder them. And then you got Imp just being absolutely hilarious, where anytime she messes up something, she just uses her power to make people forget. Imp used her power is a line that's repeated a couple times here, and it's fantastic.
Almost as much as I reached out with my swarm.
No, it can't possibly.
Me and
How...
Willer, we saw a meme where it was like I think it was like a pie chart
Yeah.
of Worm, and like some of the slices were like, oh, doing wrong things for the right reasons, but the like biggest slice of the pie chart in quotes was I reached out with my swarm.
That pie chart needed to have a section for blank for his part or blank for her part because that is used almost as much.
Yeah.
Good little Imp closer. It's Imp just became Regent. We didn't talk about it. She just literally became Regent like after Arc 26. She absorbed so much from him, and even now she has his siblings recommending stuff for her to read so that she can drop lines that will surprise Tattletale, which I will say kind of became an overused joke where it's like, Imp, where did you learn these words? They use that joke like 6 times. I think
Yeah,
that's
like I think we got I think we understood that around like Arc 27.
I think 4 times might have been good, 6 was excessive. Tenorol 3 is the best interlude chapter for me.
This is amazing because I just love the idea of this chapter where the current dragon has been crippled by Teacher, and what she really wants, and I think what Defiant wants too, is to kind of bring her back where she didn't have these restrictions, because this modern version of Dragon sees like her greatest want is to be free of these chains. And Colin tries to reload a previous version of Dragon that didn't have these restrictions, but we see that the old Dragon that has its like mind from the beginning of Worm, its greatest want is different. Like, it looks at this life that Colin and Dragon now have, this relationship, this little kind of pseudo family life where they live together. It's like, no, like this new version of me has what I want the most already. And that's just so cool to me.
Yeah, there's so many amazing moments. Like this was really well written. Defiant is working himself to the bone to try to figure out if fixing Dragon is viable, and this whole cat and mouse of him tricking her into just giving him a little more time so he can enact his plan with Pandora to fix her. This mutual trust that Defiant has in both Pandora and Dragon, where at the end of the day, Pandora made the choice to leave Dragon's memories.
Yeah.
Which it was an active decision she made, where it's like, it's kind of like sacrificing her own memories so that this happy Dragon can keep hers. That was a lot of faith that he put on both of them to come out of that the way that it did. The whole time I was so worried that this wouldn't work out. And I mean, as far as we see, it does. And I'm afraid that that won't be the case in Ward, because I feel like we can't have happy endings. But
the thing I like about this this epilogue chapter is I feel like half the epilogue chapters are kind of like this one, where we kind of get closure for a particular character and their arc, and like just seeing where they ended up after the end of the world. And those are the ones in the epilogue that I like. The other half of them are like very clearly like setting up for a sequel, which I mean, it's cool, but I care more about the ones like Epilogue 3 with Defiant and Dragon.
Yeah, there's so many little good beats in 3 as well, such as Defiant definitely used to see himself as Zeus, but now he sees more himself as, I can never say this god's name, Hephaestus.
Hephaestus. I
Hephaestus.
only know how to pronounce it because in 7th grade I had to do a report on it.
Abestus, and that's the one he relates to more now. He never saw himself as a father, but to me, Dragon and him are dad and mom. So jokes on you, buddy. Uh, and just it, I was super uneasy by the fact that Dragon had to like force. Sorry, Defiant had to force this on Dragon, and it was really heartbreaking because they've had the best romance in the whole story,
Oh yeah, they're the power couple.
and it's like this feels like a breach of trust. But at the end, she's so accepting of this choice that he made. I think it just goes to show you how much he understands her.
It's like these are actual, like somehow we snuck in like reasonable, well-adjusted, trusting people into Worm.
It's insane, right? Their understanding of each other is fantastic, and it's man, it was heartbreaking, and it worked out in the end, and they ended up in a very sweet note, and like it's sweet and like a weird, and also this idea that it's like Dragon, you say you want this peaceful life, you say you can let it go, but I know you have the urge to save others,
Yeah,
and you're not going to be happy if I don't take this risk. And that's just like, god damn, this is so mature right now of both of you.
yeah. It's like she can say that she's like complacent, but he's like, I know deep down that you want to be a hero and go out and save people.
Man, as much shit as I'm giving Tenroll, this chapter might be top 10 chapters. Everything in it was fantastic.
Yeah, this is um it's I think this is the strongest chapter in Tenorol. It's not my favorite just because the next chapter has
As
my
Rachel,
but I think I think 3 is the most strongly written of the bunch.
let's talk about this Rachel trigger or chapter. A big part of this is, Rachel has her people now. If I cut that right, she's fucking Biter on the side.
Potentially.
Okay, yeah, and and she's like, but now he wants fries and shit. What happened to my Biter? I love this idea, and it happens in Doctor Stone too, where like Biter is like, fries are a sign of society. Like having that comfort food is a sign of things being the way they should be. And I've always really liked that sentiment in stories like this.
Yeah, like having the option to decide to go get shitty food is like we're living in a modern society.
Yeah.
Um, for the most part, the reason I really love this chapter comes at the end of it. So I don't know if there's any other moments before the end of the chapter.
There's just one I want to bring up, and it's the plot thread that people are still triggering, but these trigger events are being destructive on people's bodies.
Yeah, and so this is one that I super think is like setting up for
Big Ward.
this is one where I was like, oh, this is obviously setting up for a sequel here, and eventually he announced a sequel, so I was like, oh, okay.
So yeah, it seems like without the entities to, so I mean, there's still shards in people, and the entities aren't going to be taking those shards back because they're both dead. So I guess that means that there's nothing safeguarding shards when they awaken now, right? I guess that's my takeaway here.
Yeah, we're we're finally at the point where I can't necessarily answer your questions.
Ayo!
I might not know.
Well, just theorize with me here. That's what I think.
Yeah, I think maybe on some level, like the remaining living entity was like kind of overseeing the part of trigger events that make people's powers not kill themselves.
Yeah.
And so now that he's not there to kind of now that he's not there to like oversee that, they go haywire. Or like I think each of the shards kind of have their own consciousness separate from the entity as a whole. So maybe if they recognize that the whole is no longer going to be an option, that the entity's no longer there,
Mm-hmm.
maybe they're kind of like rebelling in some way. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm positive we'll give very explicit answers to it in the future. Um, let's talk about Rachel in the grave then.
Man, I'm going to talk about the end of this chapter where Miss Militia reaches out to Rachel, and this is a very like calm and uneventful conversation that means so much to me
Yeah, the fact that it's calm and uneventful just shows you how much Rachel's progressed.
because like basically Miss Militia is just like saying, "Hey, in the future, like if you need help getting basic essentials, reach out to us. Like if there's trouble, can we at least call you?" Essentially, she's just like, "Can we trust each other?" And Rachel says, "Sure." And
Big
yeah,
news.
I want to even like read it where Miss Militia says, "Can we trust each other?" And it says, Rachel frowned. Trust. She'd lost hers right in the beginning, left alone in an apartment to starve and scald herself. Here now, 17 years later, after any number of betrayals, great and small, she was aware of the tall stone behind her, and she says, "Sure."
Damn.
And we talked earlier about how a big deal of this story with Rachel has been her issues with not being able to trust people. How time and time again she's been betrayed by, foster parents or teammates or people she worked for, like Coyle. And we get to this point now where at the end of her character arc, the end of her arc here, and I think she kind of has that other arc where she's learning to be around people, but specifically here, it's that she's able to trust someone.
Yeah.
And I think this is a good example of what I call like a lateral character arc, because this isn't taking someone who is a bad guy and making them a good guy. Rachel still does some bad things. And I wouldn't hazard to call her a good person, but she has had a character arc that goes from her being alone in the world and now being able to say, yes, I will trust you. I will give you some trust. I'm willing to work with you. And yeah, I think that's lateral. Like I said, like you don't necessarily have to have a bad, like a villain's arc be they're going to be a good guy at the end of it. This is just taking a very fundamental part of who she is and changing that part.
Man, I would even laterals. Lateral implies that I don't know. She's made such a stride. I'd say it's definitely a forward step for her. I mean,
Yeah.
it doesn't change her alignment.
Yeah, I only say lateral because like I don't know how else to describe it.
It's lateral if character development is focused on your good versus bad standing, like your alignment. You
Yeah,
know?
like this isn't about alignment. It's
Yeah.
definitely a step forward, like on a personal level for
My
her.
big takeaway here that I wrote was Rachel's much better at communicating, but she still has a long way to go,
Yeah,
which is a perfect place to end her. We talked a little bit, like when we're talking about Death Stranding, for example, characters who progress 10 to 15 to 20%, and it's a fascinating way. It's a fascinating change just because they were so stuck in their way before that even
yeah.
that small change is big.
Even like their conversation, like this, like working togetherness that Miss Militia and Rachel are talking about. Miss Militia's like, "Can we call this a starting point?" And Rachel's like, "A starting point." And I think you're right. Like this is kind of a beginning for her
Yeah.
rather than the end.
Yeah, man. I hope she's in the sequel. She's worth it.
She is we're gonna talk about our top fives, various top
No
fives about
spoiling. We know she's number one.
everyone. Like Rachel is just I fucking love Rachel.
Save it, Bucko.
Bucko.
Um, I realized as we were talking about it, her returning to this stone. I assume she returns here often. It reminds me of a dog returning to the deceased owner's house, or Hachiko and Chow Chow.
Ooh.
So she's become the dog of legend who awaits for her owner at the memorial. Uh, Tenroll 5. Tenroll 5 is a chapter where teacher tries to recruit Amy. That's the easiest skip of my life. Tenroll End.
Yeah, I never expected you to particularly enjoy this chapter, and this is another one of those ones where I'm not huge on it just because, like I said, I like the Defiant and Rachel type chapter more than like setting up for the future events. Like I I want an epilogue to be the end of the story I just read,
Yeah,
not the
the
beginning of a
setup.
story I haven't.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know.
That's part one of two. Why Tenroll? I say Tenroll's a mistake, half jokingly. That's part one of two. I'll get to part two actually in the end one here. To give teacher his due credit, in that Tenroll chapter, that's maybe the most interesting he's been. You're getting a little bit more in his mindset, and he gets like he gives me a Coil vibe, which is why he's not that interesting. Like Coil Accord teacher, cut from the same cloth, except he is more tinker based,
Yeah, Coil's
less
the best one.
yeah, and it's that's cool. I guess we need a Coil for next arc. And he has his own stuff going on here and there. Ingenue exists. Um, Teneral End. I'd say three components to this chapter, right? There's there's this section in the start. I don't think this is explained, or I missed it. A boy is in a train talking to it. I'm almost positive it's a boy, unless I.
It's Taylor.
Oh, okay. It was Taylor in both sections.
Yeah.
Okay, what the fuck? Because Taylor, huh?
So whenever I first read this chapter, okay, I can't say when I first read this chapter because the first time this was actually the first chapter of Worm I ever read.
Right, the legendary story.
Yeah, my friend in high school was like, "Hey, you should read the story Worm. I think you'd really like it." And I went home, and at the time, the first link on the front page was to this chapter, and I read it, and I was like, "Oh, that was interesting." And then I told him about it the next day at school, and he was like, he probably had a heart attack, and he's like, "Oh my, like, start at this chapter instead." Um, so that I don't know. I say the first time I read this chapter, the first time I finished this story, and I actually knew what was going on. I was like, yeah, why did she think she was a boy? Later in the chapter, Taylor runs her hand over her head, and she feels smooth spots on her head where the bullets would have hit her. And I think she mentioned her hair was cut short, so she probably just looked more boyish.
Oh, all right. I could have sworn to God, yeah, that they said it was a boy. So that's why I was like, what the
Yeah.
fuck?
Well, the lady on the train thought Taylor was a boy.
The lady on the train wasn't uh, whatever Taylor's mom name is, right?
No,
That was just another lady.
it was just a lady.
That's a weird section to have in this chapter. I'm just gonna say it. That feels random and odd, unless that section has some hints on like the true nature of that sequence. But in the, let's say, quote unquote real world, we have the Undersiders having a toast for the dead and a little reorganization here. More Imp, where did you learn these words? Ooh. And it's bouncing back and forth. We get, I think, the big takeaway there is that we get the reveal that Gru died when Scion dropped the spirit bomb.
Yeah, Tattletale says like she hoped that Taylor hadn't caught on in her final moments that Gru never made it off the oil rig.
What a good twist.
That's a cool way to deliver that news too.
Also, like, it's cool because no one really cares. So revealing it like this is the only way to make it interesting.
Like, to me, like Gru, to me, Gru died in that fridge when Bonesaw took him.
Regent died for Gru's sins. Don't forget.
Like, Gru was still, his body was still alive after that, but he died in Arc 13 to me.
Yeah, he.
Like, he's done.
I feel like he very maybe deliberately plateaued. It's hard to say deliberately because he was he only had one big point of being interesting, which was then when he was getting horribly tortured. Um, that's just kind of the guy Gru is.
You're saying
Hey,
you just gotta torture Gru more.
there was speaking of Gru, there was one final spoiler about Worm that I knew. I think the last one that we discussed. What was it? I talked about I talked about how I heard Eidolon was villainous, but he was like mixed. I talked about how I knew that Taylor had some involvement with babies of some nebulous method. But there was one that the spoiler was you actually, because I read your badass review of Worm that you should probably release to the public. Um, and it talked about Gru's trigger event being a lie when he explained it. When was that revealed?
So that was speculated for a very long time, and it's since been confirmed.
Huh.
A lot of people were just kind of able. That's just kind of the vibe that was gotten, um, because what we know of like the relationship between trigger events and
Right. It makes sense totally.
like Brian's trigger event, like Brian's power is very much like having to do with hiding, and he describes it as like, oh, bad guy was beating up my sister, I went and I beat him up and I didn't even know I got powers until I got home, which like from what we know of trigger events, like when a trigger event happens.
Yeah.
And like you might not remember the visions, but like you fucking know that you had a trigger event. And like throughout most of the beginning of the story, anytime the Undersiders are planning things, Brian is very much not the kind of guy to want to rush in to combat. He votes no on virtually all of their missions.
Yeah.
He's a very like play it safe, try to get away kind of guy, which I'm like that aligns very well with this
He's also
power.
big into reputation, which what cool reputation of beating up your sister's abuser.
Yeah, it's just like he's very much like a play it safe and try to get away kind of guy, which plays into his power, but that doesn't sound like his trigger event. It sounds to me like it's much more likely that in that moment, whenever his sister was being abused, if that is what was happening, he hid rather, and maybe he triggered because he wanted to hide.
You're saying that Wildbow then later confirmed this as word of God? Word of Bow?
We know for a fact that Brian was not truthful about his trigger
That's
event,
all we know?
as far as I know.
Okay. Then we'll go with that. The second lie you told me is that Madison would be relevant again. Did I miss
I
her?
did not lie about that.
What do you mean?
I didn't say it would be in Worm.
Ah, is Madison the rabbit girl that the
No,
TNMTM always has?
I mean, I don't know that, but I don't
no.
think it is.
Shit. Ward, crazy. What's Glowworm like? What's that all about? Is that
So
like a
Glowworm was kind of like teaser chapters he released leading up to Ward.
are they're canon? Are they in the
They're
Ward
canon.
book, or are they like in a Glowworm like specific like little minis arc?
They're like their own tiny.
They're not like Arc One, right? Like a Arc One that is later reformatted.
it is like one singular like arc, and it's like the length an arc would be.
But it's like an Arc Zero then.
Kinda.
Okay.
Like, yeah, I guess.
Anywho, Glowworm's a funny name. Um, Taylor's conversation with her mom. There were so many questions that felt surreal to me.
Okay.
Like, I feel like some stuff she said didn't quite add up. She was like, 500 million people died on my planet. I thought that was the number we were given in Arc 27. Did he never attack
That's
Earth
how
Bet
many
again?
people died on Annette's particular planet.
On Annette's planet.
Yeah.
Coincidentally, the same amount of people that had died at a certain point in Earth Bet.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it was the same number, but she's saying like that's how many people their Earth lost.
Okay. Danny is there, and sure, maybe, maybe not. I mean, when Tattletale said "I'm sorry," was that before or after Gru's death?
Uh, Probably after.
If it was after, then maybe it was about Gru. But if it was before, I feel like that confirms Danny died.
I can't particularly remember.
More importantly, first of all, just I guess the actual contents of her conversation with her mom are very sad, and like it's very cathartic to see Taylor get this off her chest with her the closest thing she can to her mom. Um, but then also like she sees Regent at the end there.
Yeah, so one thing nobody can claim to know, like if someone claims to know, they're bullshitting, is whether this is an actual alive Taylor or if it's some kind of afterlife. And Wildbow has like intentionally used elements to like make you think it could be either way. Like, Taylor will see someone that like, is that Alec? I don't know. And like my favorite instance of this is where Tattletale said like they just needed to convince Dinah that Taylor's actually dead, which you could read it either way. Like either Taylor actually is dead and Dinah didn't believe it, so they wanted to convince her, or Taylor's alive, but they wanted to hide that from Dinah. Um, and like I think it's also made more clear, or I think like another way he accomplishes this is that this chapter's written a little differently. It feels a little more surreal than other chapters.
Yeah, I
Uh,
could. It's hard to explain exactly how, but I can get that sense.
this is like it's intentionally left unclear whether Taylor is alive or dead. I think he wanted to do that because like there are camps of people who would have been like, "Oh, she died at the end, story ruined." But then there's probably also some people who are like, "Oh, she lived through all that. Oh, story
You
ruined."
know how I talked about the ambiguity of Taylor's decision versus humanity being able to work together on their own and how good that was? I don't like this ambiguity. This ambiguity sucks. Bradley, what is your final stance of if is she alive or dead? What do you think?
I just don't know.
You got nothing?
I don't know.
I
Like it,
unfortunately have a stance here,
okay.
and it ruins everything I loved about the ending of Worm. Um, she has to be alive because at the end, even after the Dinah thing comes in, Tattletale says, "And what are you gonna do about the Taylor situation?" And Tattletale says, "Oh, you don't worry about that." I'm sorry if that Taylor situation is the fact that she is dead, and Tattletale is somehow like I don't know tricking people into thinking she's alive. That's lame. That's a lame fake out. That's weak. Bad. That's a bad Wildbow if that's the case. So I don't believe Wildbow is bad because he's clearly a very good writer here. So that can only mean that she is alive and Tattletale's keeping it secret because why else would she be handling the the Taylor situation if not for that? Um, and what we saw there, I find it hard to believe. So I do think she's alive, but what we saw there wasn't her actually visiting Earth Bet. I feel like it's like a illusion or something to keep her in a catatonic state. Just the fact that Danny is there and she sees Alec potentially um, doesn't mesh well with reality in my opinion. So that's kind of where I stand on that. Please leave your comments below on your stance on that portion of the ending.
So while I don't know which direction it goes, whether she's alive or dead, I like it. I like it better interpreting it as her being alive because in these conversations with her mother and her dad, we kind of get some reflections she's had on her journey since it ended, and what that means for her going forward. Because she's had time to think since the events of Arc 30. And this thinking starts when she realizes that no matter she's very young, but no matter what she does for the rest of her entire life, she will never be doing anything even a 10,000th as important as what she was doing before.
Yeah.
And that is probably a very daunting thing for a young person to think. Like, why should I keep doing anything if it's never like if I'm already past the climax of my life?
That is until teacher fused with Scion shows up in Ward.
And then Greg one shots them.
It's time.
So Taylor is able to start thinking like, what is my life going forward? Um, and this talk with Annette is like, you need to not be worrying about that. She says, in the grand scheme of things, you're very young. And Taylor's like, you do not understand the shit that I've been going through. And Annette's like, okay, like maybe you're right. But if you're asking what you should worry about going forward, I'm saying don't worry about it. And Taylor kind of ruminates on this over the course of the conversation. And by the end of the chapter, she's kind of made up her mind where a big deal with Taylor that kind of got her into her whole journey and drove much of what she did is that Taylor can't not do something.
Yeah.
If she thinks something needs to be done, she will do it. She always has to have a mission. And she tries to get this advice from Annette, like, what do I do going forward? And she ruminates it. And at the end of the chapter, she's able to kind of think like, okay, you know what? Where we are now, everyone's okay. We're safe. And she says, and this is like where we're putting a pin in this particular aspect of Taylor. She says, if and when a problem came up, if it somehow reached this earth, she could stand by to let someone else handle it. She'd done her share. I think
Right.
Taylor, now that she's had time to ruminate on it, she's like, maybe I don't have to do everything. And to be clear, I still think 30.7 is like the supreme finale to Taylor's character. But I did get that moment out of this epilogue chapter.
That's an excellent moment to get, and I wonder if she is in Ward later on. I could see her being like a late addition as like a holy shit, Taylor Hebert's back, and exploring what that means for her to be back if the situation's dire enough. I wonder if she could keep out of it completely, if not even help, But I don't know. That being said, 30.7 was, like I said, the perfect ending, including the emotions I felt towards Taylor's death, which were fucking lies when they say Contessa has a regular looking pistol and she shoots her in the unprotected part of the head. I'm like, okay, it's just a revolver. And she shoots her twice because Contessa and the Numberman, while they were shooting like the Slaughterhouse 9000, they had a particular shooting style of like always double and triple tapping. So I was like, okay, nothing weird there. And my perfect ending is unfortunately no longer perfect. That's just the matter of things because of Tenroll.
Yeah, I this is one of those things where I'm gonna pull something out of the playbook of Willer and Joe, where I say don't think about it too much because
Shit.
we are never. I don't think we are ever going to get the answer, is Taylor actually alive or dead? And I don't know, maybe someone who's like all caught up on Ward is laughing at me. But Wildbow has memed this for so long, where like people will ask him like, okay, is Taylor alive or is she dead? And he's just like, yes. And like, okay, asshole.
Oh, if any of the Undersiders are in Ward, I think it's bullshit then that we wouldn't find out. Because like if like Tattletale is hiding this, I don't know, man. It's just it introduced a complication that I would have rather not have. If people were like, "Man, Taylor dying sucks," I'd rather, I don't know. Maybe I'm just speaking for me. I'd rather have a chance of people thinking that's a bad ending than introducing this lukewarm, wishy-washy ending.
Yeah, I don't think we're gonna find out which way
Even
it is, one or the other.
even with all that good stuff you said, which is genuinely good, I think that's a good takeaway from this.
Yeah.
Uh, time.
Hey everybody, that was Worm.
That was. Did you take it? Did you take all of it? All
This
31
is
arcs?
where I announce to the public that legally I can never ask Willer to read anything ever again.
That's not true. Now I do have leeway now, but I
You
mean
do have
One Piece is a comparable trade,
you have your card.
and you did JoJo, so it's fine. We're good.
Well, okay.
Um, that being so, I mean, let's do our top five, and then let's talk about the future of our Take That You Worm segment, if there is a future.
Yeah.
Top fives. What do we want to? Let's do top five arcs.
Top 5 arcs first.
Yeah.
All right. We're gonna talk about our top 5 arcs, and I think it would be cool if people also left their top 5 arcs.
Yeah, I love seeing ordered lists.
Yeah,
I'm a
I want to know
sucker.
people's rankings because like there was one I can't remember which video it was on where I think specifically like what you and I had told each other in our free time is like, see, like I love arc 17. Like a lot of people really love 20. I don't think it's that great, but I love 17. And someone said like the exact inverse on one of our videos. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know, everyone loves 17. I don't think it's that great. Now arc 20,
Not arc
that's my
20
shit.
though. All right, let's sandwich this. I'll go, then you go, then you go, then I go for the character rankings.
Okay. Wait, so are we gonna say like your number 5, my number 5, like then your number 4?
Oh no, we were so unprepared. That'll be difficult. Let's just go one by one, maybe.
Okay.
All right. I'm not gonna lie. I was reviewing the last 5 arcs instead of putting this together, so I'm gonna do it off the dome.
All right, I got my notes.
Let me hold on. So if I had to, let me think about it for a second, just a quick second. I think I would go this, then this, then this, then this, then this, then this, then this. All right, my top 5 arcs, from least awesome to most awesome is 25,
Okay.
26,
Ooh,
19.
that's on my list.
17, 30.
We got some we have a lot of crossover on our favorite list.
I'm happy because as I feel like sometimes we're really different, but then also sometimes we're oddly alike.
Yeah, we have a lot in common on our favorite arcs list.
Should I maybe give a quick reason why I love each arc and then you do the same? I think.
Yeah, go for
All
it.
right. 25 is the battle with Behemoth, and it's maybe aside from Scion stuff where at least Scion was holding back sometimes, and that took me away from it a little bit, like maybe like 2% taking away from it. Behemoth has a very structured way to hold back. It's very ingrained in his character and his purpose for existing. So, and yet that arc is still so tense with so much team ups. I'm gonna cheat and also count the 24 interlude with Cody here because that really set stuff into motion here. It's just like such an intense fight. Behemoth is terrifying. There's so many good team ups. Regent's death is in this arc. The Chevalier finale and the Scion killing Behemoth is one of the most uplifting moments in Worm before it all comes tumbling down in 26. Wait, that's wrong. Am I talking about 24?
Maybe. I don't know. Okay, wait, let's see which one.
Yeah, no, I am. Shit, because 25 is the one with Konsu.
Okay, we're talking about the Behemoth arc for anyone.
Yeah, I'm talking. Okay, so I'm talking about 24, aren't I? And then it's that 23 interlude with Cody that I'm cheating for. All right, let me redo this. It's 24, 26, 19, 17, 30. Everything I just said applies to 24. 26 is only this low because the first half has the Slaughterhouse 9000, which is my least favorite maybe action portion. But my god, the second half of this arc with Taylor, Theo, Jack, and Scion is out of this world good. It may be the strongest stretch in Worm. I don't know, 30 though.
Ooh,
Um, it's fantastic. Like Theo versus Jack. Theo working with Dinah. Taylor stealing herself into killing potential hostages and a child.
shooting babies.
She's shooting Taylor. Insert meme here, baby killing meme. Um, it was insane, and then you get that mind blowing, extremely well written, mystery solving chapter with Scion that we talked about for so long. Uh, 19 is deep into the Echidna arc, as I recall,
Oh yeah.
and it has great moments of teamwork with Taylor and the wards. Echidna is maybe I think it's still Echidna is my favorite villain.
Echidna
Mm.
arc is so strong.
Echidna's my favorite villain action wise. We'll say that. Jack's my favorite villain, but Echidna's my favorite like
That was like the
villain to
Echidna
fight.
fight is just so cool.
Yeah, you got the triumvirate like just in the background kicking ass. You got Taylor and Clockblocker. You got Tattletale finding out the secrets of the powers in the middle of it. You got the very satisfying conclusion of the Traveler storyline. Which, speaking of the Travelers, that leads us into my number 2, which is Arc 17, a
Oh,
arc fully devoted to the Travelers. It was a perfect slice out of the main story that completely recontextualized everything that came before it and was the beginning to the my favorite, I think, overall arc in Worm is 17, 18, 19. And it wouldn't have worked if you didn't set up this amazing relationship and circumstance that the Travelers had to go through. Finally, I can't believe something beat 17. Spec, man. Spec. The Taylor arc, two very small flaws in it. Teacher, you know how he be. Everything else, though, Taylor went sickle mode. Megalovania was playing the whole time. I don't know from where. That ending was perfection. Tenor was a mistake. 10 out of 10. There you go. Those are my favorite arcs. Bradley, hit us.
Beck is just so good. So we have a lot. We have a lot of overlap. So my number 5 is arc 19. Like you said, deep in the Echidna arc. It is just one of the coolest like stretches of action in the whole story, and the Travelers themselves are really cool, and that's like the conclusion to their storyline.
Mm-hmm.
So like except for Cody, obviously. So and Oliver, God rest his soul. So
The fucking chattest.
yeah, arc 19 is my number 5. Arc 4, or my fourth favorite arc, is arc 26. um like if it wasn't like I already really liked it, but I think it earns its spot on this list like just for that interlude,
Yeah.
where we learn like everything about the setting of the story, because that's like a very Bradley chapter, and I don't know, it just did it for me. Arc My third favorite arc is arc 11, where
Mm.
one thing I'll say often about this story is like the second chapter of the story is where I decided I was interested. Arc 3 is where I'm like, okay, this story's good. Arc 11 is where I decided this is my favorite book of all time. Specifically when the Slaughterhouse 9 interludes start, because the first two of those are just so strong.
Yeah.
So
It
arc
ends
11,
pretty strong too with the Amy interlude's pretty good with Bonesaw.
yeah. So has a special place in my heart. Second favorite arc is arc 17. It like it's so fucking good.
I can't believe how it is such a tight story.
Like we get the news that Echidna escaped, and then we're like, oh god, what's the next arc going to be about? And then you get this kid like telling his mom that he needs to take his computer over to his friend's house to play a game, and you're just like, what the fuck are we about to get into? And like there was mystery around the Travelers up to this point, and we finally learn about them, and they're just cool.
Well, I did mention, but I'm sure you also enjoy the mystery of the Simurgh and the tension of her being in the background the whole time.
Yeah, because like this is, I think, the like, because we had no idea. We knew this Endbringer existed, but we didn't know exactly what it did. And even when it shows up, it's a few chapters before we really understand what's going on here. And there's a lot of moments where, aside from these teenagers just being asshole teenagers, we also see moments where it's clear that like the Simurgh has like manipulated the way they're going to view each other. And it's just,
We can quote the lines "Fuck you, Simurgh."
oh yeah,
Also, the lines "Fuck you, Cody."
yeah, fuck you, Cody. And my number one favorite arc 30. It's the culmination of our story, and the final battle is so fucking cool. What more can I say?
What more can I say? Man, we got it. Yeah, I'm happy with our overlaps.
Yeah,
Do we want to do chapters, or are we good for just characters? Because I'd have to think.
I like characters as a finale. We can talk about favorite chapters.
Okay, hold on. Let me think real quick for chapters, because I got some good ones.
I could do mine while you look through like the list of chapters.
No, I won't be able to think because I'll be listening. Just give me. I can do this. Da 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 da.
I know some of them that are going to be on your list no matter what.
Oh yeah, I mean that's unfair.
While we look through, hey everyone, what's your favorite moment that Taylor says, "I reached out with my swarm"? Leave it in the comments.
Um. Oof, this is tough. No, I got my 3. I'm just trying to order them now.
This is like major league podcasting right here.
All right, no, we're ready. What do you mean? We're professional. All right, I'll go first this time. Well, no, I went first last time. You go.
Okay. So I'm gonna, for my 5th favorite chapter, I don't know if this is cheating. I have a tie between 2 chapters that are immediately adjacent to each other.
Fuck it. I mean, there's only the 2 of us here.
Yeah. It's like a tie between 19.5 and 19.6.
I can totally see why. Yeah.
These are both here just for how fucking cool the action is. 19.5 is like one of the biggest shit hitting the fan moments in the story, where they already could not beat Echidna, and then Echidna comes back even bigger and stronger than before, and then Echidna copies Eidolon and Alexandria, 2 of the strongest people in the world, and then she gets cloned, so now there's 4 Echidnas, and the chapter ends right around there, and I'm just like, we're fucked. Like, that's...
But then 19.6 has the god tier, like maybe the best attack in Worm.
Like Taylor doing the clock blocker combo attack nails it on this.
It's only rivaled by Taylor dropping the bombs.
Yeah. So like that was just the coolest. So those tie for my 5th favorite chapter. My 4th favorite chapter, 11.b, the Theo interlude where he meets Jack Slash.
Boy.
Like from like the first paragraph, I was hooked on this chapter. It is so tense. I feel like I am sitting in that living room with this maniac. I'm so nervous for Theo the whole time.
If there's one chapter, like Wild Bow is like you can only make one chapter. I think it'd be this one. Into like a short. Like this would look incredible.
Yeah, and like I don't know if Worm was going to be like readapted or retold with Theo as the main character, like you could in theory do this as the first chapter.
Oh, crazy.
It's so good. 3rd favorite chapter, 26.x, the Scion interlude. It's everything I love. 2nd favorite chapter, 30.7, the end of Spec, the like true finale of the story. We talked about it for like an hour earlier, so you know why it's good.
You know why.
And I thought about this for a long time because I was really teeter-tottering back and forth between 30.7 being my number 1, but I really, after going back and rereading it again, because I've read it so many times. I really think my favorite chapter is 11.A, which is Rachel's interlude.
Interesting.
That is the point where I decided this is my favorite book, and I don't know why Rachel connects with me so much, because she's not a character that I have very much in common with. I think this was one of the first moments where I thought about a character's power as an extension of their character. And it offers a lot of insight into a character that up to that point I was like, oh, they're just an asshole and there's not any more to them. But we see this like very self-reflective person who's very aware of how crippled her social abilities are and how much that hurts her. And it's one of the first chapters in the story where one of our main characters looks at Taylor and can echo our thoughts that like they do these horrible things. Like she talks about Taylor, it's like like she did like these horrible things. She wanted to betray us, and the other members of our team just forgave her like that. They like her even better now. And I don't know, I fucking love that chapter because I fucking love this character.
You're super right on that mentioning of Taylor. Also, her trigger event is maybe the best in the series.
It is so...
It's
fun.
very tragic and good and fitting.
Oh, man. All right, Willow, what are we looking at? What are the good chapters?
Number 5, 30.4.
Woo!
30.4 escalates really nicely as far as horrendous things Taylor is doing. This is the moment where she's capturing everybody.
Yeah, she captures everyone.
And I believe this is also the one where she finishes off Dragon. But then that last line really clinches it. It's the culmination of Taylor's whole character arc to this point. Give or take another chapter.
Yeah.
Here's going to be a fun stretch. 26.A. Theo interlude.
Because, we love Theo.
Of him fighting Jack. This is the one where it ends with him getting absolutely shredded by what will be Jack's team ultimate attack with Hookwolf in the fighting game.
Which was badass. Also, Jack shirtless with the
Claymore, and Theo shit talking him, and it for some reason properly cracking Jack's facade was fantastic.
Theo telling off Jack is just so good.
Number 3, 26.B.
Hey.
Theo rushing to defeat Jack. And working with Dinah is a heart-pounding. Theo's such a badass. This is his true hero moment. It makes Taylor look like a fucking chump.
He's a true hero.
I absolutely love it. Guess what the next one is? 26.C or .X. So we have 3 chapters in a row in the middle there. Do I have 6 chapters? I do.
Let's just do 6 anyway.
Well, I'm doing 6. I mean, you got your bonus one, I get a bonus.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
What more can be said about the absolute genius? I talked about it when we were talking about our 26. It's absolute genius. It's for me, it's the mystery review aspect of it. Everything fits in so nicely, and the entities are so fascinating to follow around. Number 2, 17.8 or 17.7, the final 17 chapter.
Oh man, you have talked so much about the final moment of that chapter and how badly you want that adapted just to look at that scene.
That chapter, so before then, it also has all these great moments of Klaus coming to terms with how far he's already made his team go, and being inside his head in this chapter is fascinating. He's sympathetic and also disgusting at the same time for having roped everyone into the situation, but with the context of why he's there, it's just absolutely tragic. And then when they get their one glimmer of hope with working with Coil, you flash back to the moment we left off at 16.13. I think that's the number 1 single best moment in Worm.
It is it's so good.
And finally, 30.7, the ending that never was. A absolute masterclass in being inside the head of this crazy girl after her entire perception as a human has been destroyed, and it the whiplash of when she saw the cheering as acts of violence is just the beginning of what ends to be a very sad and beautiful ending to the story.
Yeah, this is like this. I think is like my definition for tragedy. Like,
oh yeah,
it's crazy.
This is the worm.
Yeah.
All right, I can do my characters now, and then you can close it out with your characters.
All right.
My top 5 characters. Number 5, Dragon. What a fascinating character. What a good mom. I wasn't sure what to think of Dragon. I, in fact, thought she would be a huge threat. Maybe I was a little saint-like back in the day. The way she develops throughout the story, she ends up being more sympathetic and more human than many of the characters. She's just a very interesting and different character in the story, and it's cool how Wildbow is able to do chapters from her point of view and like not confuse us as humans with the way she operates. It worked really well. Number 4, Jack, the most entertaining villain of the series. Jack is a piece of shit with his illusions of grandeur, but and cheating with his broadcast shard. But at the end of the day, he executes on it, and he is very in line with that chaos, with that evolution that the shards were made for.
And it's just delightful to hear him talk. He really has a silver tongue.
He really does. I like when he's manipulating people, such as the Goblin King. I like how he can intimidate Theo. I love when he's manipulating the Nine. Ooh. And those last chapters. I mean, at the end of the day, Jack won. I think back to all the humans having to massacre these clones, including the heroes, like Clockblocker giving his hero's word and then incinerating Nyx, or even Sweet Theo having to crush skulls, and Taylor becoming the monster that she becomes. At the end of the day, I really feel like, aside from the internal pay that he's in, Jack really won with his ideals.
Yeah, I feel like after a couple 100,000 years, when the whatever's fueling the time bubble runs out, he's gonna somehow find his way out and be like, oh hey, look at that.
Oh hey.
World ended.
That Capri was pretty cool.
Hey.
Number 3, Regent. The most underused character was, that's just because he had even more potential, because the amount he was used was enough for him to land in my top 3. He's fun, he's fucked up, he's quirky, he's horrifying. He was just trying to become a better person. He made a true bond with Imp. He truly cared for his team. He had some heroic qualities in there, Yeah. And then he also had a very terrifying past.
Alex Interlude was one of the first chapters that I think like really stuck with you, because like before Worm, you're like, I really like this chapter.
Yeah, I think you cut off there for a little bit. It's happened like 3 times now, but I can guess what you were saying. Back before that chapter, basically, I wasn't in love with any particular chapter, aside maybe the Brutus interlude. That shit was lit. But this was the one that was like, oh wait, Worm is fantastic. It has its really high moments.
Yeah.
Theo is my second favorite character. He's so good. His journey's so great. Even if I feel like him joining the Ward was a little too samey to what we've seen before, it doesn't change the fact that the finale of his character arc and his relationship with Taylor and Jack were fascinating, and the story, I wonder what a story fully from his point of view would have been. It's interesting because in all of Wildbow's proposed stories, it doesn't seem like he ever considered Theo to be a main character candidate.
At least of the ones that were in that particular list, he didn't show up. I know there's other ones that he considered outside that list, but I don't have all.
My favorite character is Defiant. Is this a surprise? Defiant's character arc, I have a soft spot for arrogant assholes who learn their lesson. And Defiant, from the beginning, I think you'll remember, back when I complained about like not really loving Worm characters, there were 2 characters that stuck out to me just because they stood out from kind of like the more neutral personalities that were in early Worm. One was Bakuda because she was insane and had a really fun power. The second was Armmaster because he was so cheesy. And somehow I got invested in that cheese, and he became this really complex, cyborg man who is 7 feet tall and has a vibrating penis.
Yeah,
It's
and
great.
what a penis it is. And like, it's so cool how this guy who was like almost he had a very hard time connecting with people, like kind of he's like robotic, and this relationship with an AI by the end of the story has made him more human.
And it's fantastic because he's still very aware of his non-human sides, and that awareness means that he's able to make an effort to keep evolving. And Colin, I didn't feel like he was done growing as a person at the end there, even though he had grown so much, and it's great.
So, yeah. Colin, we like you, bud.
I love you. Bradley, close us out.
Okay. I was up until about 30 seconds ago. My number 5 was Taylor's lawyer, Kaye. Because like
he's fun. He's cool.
Like he's just enjoyable. Like from the moment we heard about him. I don't know.
Speaking of Wildbow making more vibrant personalities, Kaye, that is a very good step in the right direction.
Like everything about him was just fun, where it's like, you know, Taylor's like on blast from these heroes. He's like, "Oh, do you want me to get you a sandwich?" And then he's like, "Oh, it's a 10-minute drive. I'll be there in 9." And then like I think my part where I just like really loved him is where he spends like a dozen paragraphs listing all of her crimes. He's like, "I'm gonna level with you. I'm done with work."
But who replaced him, Bradley?
He got replaced actually by Blasto.
Oh, Blasto!
Who he's only I was about to say he's only in one chapter. He's in future chapters.
No, Blasto kind of proper is only in one chapter.
Yeah, his interlude. It's one of Wildbow so quickly like gets me into the head of this character, and we have such a short time to get to know him. Yet his sacrifice, or at least attempted sacrifice at the end of the chapter, still lands so well, where he's like, "I'm a bad guy, and I will admit that," but he's like, she, Bonesaw, has like crossed some sort of line. Like he's like, I want her to live less than I want to live.
Even beyond that, his rationalizations within his experiments and his bad guy his bad guy personality, the rationalization for it all is just really fun to go through. Like, I'm like, I get you, dude. You're this kind of villain. You're all right.
Yeah. So I don't know. Yeah, I love him. So I don't know. He kicked out Kaye, but I love both of them. My number 4 is Imp. I like this character. The first time we saw her, she was really just like asshole teenager. She had no respect for her brother, any kind of authority. She's the kind of person who would do the opposite of what you told her to. During like the Slaughterhouse 9 arc, she was still kind of in that territory where she was going to go against what the group wanted. Everyone's like, "Hey, what you're thinking is a bad idea." She's like, "Fuck you. I can prove myself." Because that's the deal. She had a lot of wanting to prove herself and proving that she could use her power to be the badass that she can be. She wanted to be this powerful assassin who is an asset to the team. And before Taylor leaves the Undersiders, that's exactly what she's scared of Imp becoming, because Imp has like the assassin power. Mm-hmm. And it would be really easy for Imp to become just so jaded in that regard. And we see by the end of the story that she kind of has matured a little bit. She's not that... She's still, like... she still likes to be funny. But she kind of also has this loyalty to her, like, friends and teammates that she didn't always have. And she's taken this responsibility for these kids, the heartbroken, which, I mean, it's kind of what her brother wanted to do for her at some point, to be this guardian for her that she's now being for these kids. So I don't know. I like her.
I will say with Imp, there was a portion there. After Taylor had left the Undersiders, and even a little before, Imp, when she was with Regent, she was too much of a jokester. While Regent was already the jokester of the crew, so it felt redundant. But I feel like post time skip Imp is fantastic.
Yeah, post time skip is where she shines.
I feel like she shines especially because she was so annoying there for a little bit. But I think something to mention with Imp is that she's the best use of the medium to support her power.
Oh, yes.
And I think that's definitely worth bringing up. Not to delve in too deep. I think it's pretty self-explanatory, but yeah.
Third favorite character, I'm going to go with Taylor.
Interesting.
Like, we said it a million times. Like, as a person, I think she's a monster. And that's okay, because that's kind of the point. I think she's a fascinating protagonist. Because we follow this story through her point of view, where in her mind all these things are justified, and we get to the end of the story, and like, I don't know, we talked for like an hour or two about how and why 30.7 was just such a amazing ending to her character. But I don't know, I just really like her as a protagonist. There are other stories like this where you have a protagonist who is at first presented sympathetic, and it's revealed that maybe we're not necessarily supposed to be on their side.
Yeah.
So she's not unique in that regard. But this was one of the first stories that I read that had that element, and I thought it was a really fun execution of it.
Now you really like when you see that.
Yeah, now I really do.
I'm gonna have to revoke your Taylor Sucks Club card, but I'm sure you'll live.
Second favorite character is Jack.
Hey.
He's just so fun.
His power is really fun too, I didn't mention.
I don't know. It's just fun to hear this guy talk.
He's just the joy of an asshole.
Yeah. And my favorite character is Rachel, bitch, hellhound. I love this girl. Just seeing like, I think she has like a very, like it feels like a very gradual but natural growth into where she ends up with her character arc, because it doesn't happen all at once, and there are times where she even revs back in the opposite direction, as far as, you know, kind of our whole deal is we want to get Rachel to a place where she can trust people and where she can even open up to people and, you know, have friends. And Taylor was the first person to reach out to her, and obviously Rachel fights back hard against this. And near the end of, like, as we approach like arc 7-8, Rachel has finally kind of been willing to throw Taylor a bone, no pun intended. And then we reverse hard back in the opposite direction when she finds out that Taylor was going to betray them, and even harder still when she meets the Siberian and sees that this is the first person in her life that she can converse with, that she understands. And Rachel's philosophy of, I just want to be able to like run free and not have to worry about what other people think. She's like, that's what the Slaughterhouse 9 is offering. And I don't know. And then like, I don't want to summarize the entire story. What I'm saying is, I loved watching how Rachel grows, and the moments where she struggles with this growth that we need her to go through is some of my favorite in the story.
Please check out Bradley's video essay for further information on Rachel.
There you go.
You know what's nice about a video essay about Worm? You don't really need a background or editing.
Yeah, I guess not.
Just podcasting. That's all of our characters. I have, two final things to cover. Did you know this current episode of Take That You Worm is longer than some of our entire podcast, Bradley?
Jesus Christ.
We are at 2 hours and 30 minutes for 30 and 10 rule. We've been recording for over 4 hours, so I'll try to speed this up. I have I have a final rating of Worm. I like to rate things. Ratings are never final, of course. Things change with time. Worm is... I'm of two minds about it. It's at least a 4.
Hey.
Potentially a 4.5. For something that I was so wishy-washy about in the beginning. The thing that has me at maybe a 4 now.
Out of 5.
Out of 5, which is very good. Yeah, I'm not a madman. Worm's fucking great. So I've spoken at length of I think Worm could stand to be a little shorter, have shorter fights, stuff like that. Because it's, you know, I never found fights to be the most engaging part of script or literature, but like dialogue and thoughts, I think, are where literature can really shine. And I feel like Worm fucking nails it with that near the end. So there are definitely, I won't lie if there aren't like parts of Worm where I was like, man, I don't know if I like this, or usually it's just like this was stretched out a bit too long kind of scenarios. I feel like within Worm, the edited version of Worm can be an easy 5. I think it hits those highs, you know, like the highs Worm hits are some of the highest highs in any media of experience, period. But the reason why I can't give it a 5 is because there were definite lows that I complained about, so I feel like that's not fair.
Yeah, like, this is something I look forward to all the time, because the Worm has been being edited into its final version for far longer than it took to write the story the first time.
Shoutouts to Wildbow.
So, like, as far as we know, that process is still ongoing, but I also don't think Wildbow's really in any rush to do that, because he makes a lot more money than I do writing the way he is now. So.
It's still like a 4 out of 5 is great. I'm not so Worm. I don't know if I ever said this. Worm started off on a bad foot with me because 1, I'm not that into superheroes. 2, I'm not that into sci-fi, and Worm gets really sci-fi. 3, I don't really read books very often, if at all. Worm had 3 strikes against it to begin with, and I loved it. I can easily say that. And I'm sure like there will be some days where I wake up, it's like 4 was too low. I should have said 4.5. So I'm gonna say it's in this nebulous range, and there's definitely a 5 within there with just a few like chisels to be made. Also, it would be the best Netflix show. So, just saying.
5 out of 5. It's my favorite.
Of course. And I think, honestly, if someone told me Worm is a 5 out of 5, you cannot bat an eye at that. Of course. Of course people could see it as a 5 out of 5. There's just too much good in there. There's just no way. I could not, like... I could also see some people hating it, just for sheer length.
Yeah.
I don't know, though, like... Also, if they're super not into, like, anything to do with powers or morally great characters, I feel like those are the people that would be into Worm.
Like, I think there's a lot of, like, I could totally see it if someone got, like, halfway through and they're like, you know what, not feeling it. I'm like, okay, but if someone made it all the way through arc 30, I can't see them saying this was bad.
Yeah, I don't know. It's hard to believe. Maybe there's someone out there. Let's talk about the future, because this point, whenever this does come out, this is gonna put our small humble channel in an awkward spot, because there's no doubt that Worm is like one of our top 3 most popular series on our very small channel to begin with. It gets fantastic like feedback and comments and stuff and interactions, which again, we're all very small scope, but we're very glad for what Worm does get. And now that we don't have Worm, I feel like there's not much crossover between the people who like Worm and the people who like everything else in our podcast. Well, I feel like that second group has more intermingling with each other. I feel like the Worm group is very themselves. So I'm worried that I don't know, you guys should stick around. We talk about a lot of different things, and my schedules will clear up. But potentially in the future, I might do Ward, and I know Bradley has done a little bit of Ward as well.
Yeah, and like, I'm not in a rush to jump back into it because I'm doing Pact right now, which I'm really enjoying. I figured that if Tyler or Willer ever decide to jump into Ward, I think that'd be a fun time to get into it, because we would pretty much be experiencing it for the first time together.
Yeah, I think that would be really fun. That's one of the reasons. Like, I some parts about jumping into Ward worry me. I feel like it's going to be a lot more sci-fi, just given how fucked up the world is, and I hear there's a lot of Amy Dallin, so there's that. But also the idea of going to a modern Wild Bow story with the boys fresh and clean. That sounds really fun.
Yeah, especially because like we see how much better he got at writing over the course of his first book, and you realize he wrote 2 things between Worm and Ward. So his writing quality is probably a lot better.
So Ward might take a bit. I also need a Wild Bow break, TBH.
Yeah, I don't blame you.
Because, boy, I hope Ward isn't as long as Worm. Because that is a long-ass story. So, you guys, so as of recording this, Tyler hasn't finished Worm, so there will be a couple more 3-way Worm talks here and there.
We'll have some 3-ways.
We'll have some 3-ways. It'll be fun. Bradley will, I'm sure, do a Pact episode or 2 at some point.
Hey.
When we do Ward, I'd like to have somehow shorter episodes. I don't know. It'll be weird, right? You won't have the full context of the story.
Yeah, it's gonna be different.
So it'll be different. Because, I mean, when you get down to it, we have, 30 hours of Worm talk already on the channel, which is a good amount of time to talk about something. But you guys seem to like it, so we do like that. So, keep your ears out. Ward might come someday, and that'll be very interesting. Pact might come. Pact seems really interesting. Even I may get into it, because it's shorter eventually.
Yeah,
I'm interested.
Whenever I talk about it on the podcast, I'm gonna bring it up. There are so many fundamental elements of Pact that are the exact opposite of Worm, and my first thought is oh well, Worm's my favorite, so if something's the opposite, I'm probably gonna hate it, right? But it actually shines really well, so I was surprised.
Whenever Bradley explains Pact, I'm like, this is probably the one you should have recommended to me, just based on my innate tastes. Pact seems like a wackier, lighthearted, fun adventure. Maybe. We'll see. I think that's good for our literal podcast on just Arc 30 and Tenral.
Yeah. Willer, thanks for going on this journey, reading the story.
It was so good. Oh, I do have some thanks. I have 3 thanks. I have a thanks for Rain and crew.
Hey. Oh, yeah, absolutely.
For the audiobook. You guys did fantastic. I felt bad when I read the last chapter, and Rain seemed so happy to finalize this huge task he went on. Is his name Rain? I feel like I'm mixing it up all of a sudden.
Yeah, that's the guy who ran the whole thing.
What? Okay. I want to thank Wild Bow, of course, for writing this fantastic story.
Thank you.
I want to thank Bradley for being the right amount of pushy and the right amount of patient to ease me into this adventure and fielding all the various questions I had.
Yeah.
And it was fantastic.
Because it was fun. The way we kind of began our adventure is my favorite thing is obviously Worm, and Willer oscillates between One Piece and JoJo's depending on which one had a chapter come out that week. So we were eventually okay, I'll do this amount of JoJo's, you do this amount of Worm, and we each eventually got to the amount we agreed to do, and then at some point in the future, we just kind of kept going on our own, where I was because I agreed to go up through part 4 of JoJo's, and then I was like, you know what, fuck it, let's do part 5, and then I snowballed pretty hard from there, where I eventually went to part 6. I was like, oh, this is even better, and then I was like, oh, part 7's even better.
Fantastic.
And then Willer got to part 8, and the story hadn't really hit its stride for him there, so he wasn't really reading it, and before starting the podcast, we all, Willer, Joe, and Tyler and I, we would whatever we were experiencing or just things we liked, we would write short reviews of them to each other.
Because we're nerds.
Yeah, and I wrote one for Worm, and Will was like, you know what, I'll check it out.
Again.
And he really enjoyed it. And he's like, you know what, I think I'll give it another shot. And I think around the time you hit the the Alec interlude, you're like, you know what? There's some good stuff in this story.
Yeah, and I mean, not to say that there wasn't good stuff before, but it really hooked me. I was a late bloomer, and I'm glad that I bloomed.
Yeah.
Poetic. I think we're good. I think we're done.
Yeah.
Thank you all so much. Have a wonderful worm time. Bye bye.
Worm time.
Worm time.